Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
My name is Michael, and this is the story of how my father stole our childhood and trapped us in a nightmare that lasted for years. It all started when I was 10 years old. My sister Sarah was 8 at the time. We were a normal, happy family living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. Mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Dad was an engineer for a defense contractor. Looking back, I realize now that his job was probably what planted the seeds of paranoia in his mind. Everything changed the day Mom died. It was sudden. A car accident on her way home from a night shift. Dad was devastated, we all were. But while Sarah and I grieved openly, Dad retreated into himself. He started spending more and more time in the basement, emerging only for meals or to go to work. When he was around us, he was distracted, always muttering to himself and scribbling in a notebook he carried everywhere. About a month after Mom's funeral, Dad sat us down for a family meeting. His eyes had a wild, feverish gleam that I'd never seen before. "Kids," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained excitement, "I've been working on something important, something that's going to keep us safe." Sarah and I exchanged confused glances. Safe from what? Dad continued, "The world is a dangerous place. There are threats out there that most people can't even imagine, but I've seen the signs. I know what's coming." He went on to explain in terrifying detail about the impending nuclear war that he was certain was just around the corner. He talked about radiation, fallout, and the collapse of society. As he spoke, his words became more and more frantic, and I felt a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "But don't worry," he said, his face breaking into an unsettling grin. "Daddy's gonna protect you. I've built us a shelter. We'll be safe there when the bombs fall." That night, he showed us the shelter he'd constructed in secret. The basement had been completely transformed. What was once a cluttered storage space was now a fortified bunker. The walls were lined with thick concrete, and a heavy vault-like door had been installed at the entrance. Inside, the shelter was stocked with canned food, water barrels, medical supplies, and all manner of survival gear. Dad was so proud as he gave us the tour, pointing out all the features he'd incorporated to keep us safe. But all I felt was a growing sense of unease. This wasn't normal, this wasn't right. For the next few weeks, life continued somewhat normally. Dad still went to work and Sarah and I still went to school. But every evening he'd take us down to the shelter for drills. We'd practice sealing the door, putting on gas masks, and rationing food. He quizzed us relentlessly on radiation safety procedures and what to do in various emergency scenarios. Then came the night that changed everything. I was jolted awake by the blaring of air raid sirens. Disoriented and terrified, I stumbled out of bed to find Dad already in my room, roughly shaking me awake. "It's happening," he shouted over the noise. "We need to get to the shelter now." He dragged me down the hallway, where we met Sarah, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her favorite stuffed animal. Dad herded us down the stairs and into the basement. The shelter door stood open, bathed in the eerie red glow of emergency lighting. Quickly inside, Dad urged, pushing us through the doorway, "We don't have much time." As soon as we were in, Dad slammed the door shut behind us. The heavy locks engaged with a series of metallic clanks that sounded like a death knell to my young ears. The sirens were muffled now, but still audible through the thick walls. "It's okay," Dad said, gathering us into a tight hug. "We're safe now. Everything's going to be alright." But it wasn't alright. Nothing would ever be alright again. Hours passed and the sirens eventually fell silent. We waited, huddled together on one of the cramped bunk beds Dad had installed. He kept checking his watch and a Geiger counter he'd mounted on the wall, muttering about radiation levels and fallout patterns. Days turned into weeks, and still, Dad refused to let us leave the shelter. He said it wasn't safe, that the radiation outside would kill us in minutes. Sarah and I begged to go outside, to see what had happened, to find our friends and neighbors. But Dad was adamant. "There's nothing left out there," he'd say, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Everyone's gone. We're the lucky ones. We survived." At first we believed him. We were young and scared, and he was our father. Why would he lie to us? But as time wore on, doubts began to creep in. The shelter's small TV and radio picked up nothing but static, which Dad said was due to the EMP from the nuclear blasts. But sometimes, late at night when he thought we were asleep, I'd catch him fiddling with the dials, a look of frustrated confusion on his face. We fell into a monotonous routine. Dad homeschooled us using old textbooks he'd stockpiled. We exercised in the small small space to stay healthy. We rationed our food carefully, with Dad always reminding us that we might need to stay in the shelter for years. The worst part was the isolation. The shelter felt more like a prison with each passing day. The recycled air was stale and oppressive, the artificial lighting gave me constant headaches, and the silence, the awful, suffocating silence, was broken only by the hum of air filtration systems and our own voices. Sarah took it the hardest. She was only 8 when we entered the shelter, and as the months dragged on, I watched the light in her eyes slowly dim. She stopped playing with her toys, stopped laughing at my jokes. She'd spend hours just staring at the blank concrete walls, lost in her own world. I tried to stay strong for her, but it was hard. I missed the sun, the wind, the feeling of grass beneath my feet. I missed my friends, my school, the life we'd left behind. But every time I brought up the possibility of leaving, Dad would fly into a rage. "You want to die?" he'd scream, spittle flying from his lips. "You want the radiation to melt your insides, to watch your skin fall off in chunks? Is that what you want?" His anger was terrifying, and so we learned to stop asking. We became quiet, obedient shadows of our former selves, going through the motions of our underground existence. As our time in the shelter stretched from months into years, I began to notice changes in Dad. His paranoia, already intense, seemed to worsen. He'd spend hours poring over his notebooks, muttering about conspiracy theories and hidden threats. Sometimes I'd wake in the night to find him standing over our beds, just watching us sleep with an unreadable expression on his face. He became obsessed with conserving our resources, implementing stricter and stricter rationing. Our meals shrank to meager portions that left us constantly hungry. He said it was necessary, that we needed to prepare for the possibility of staying in the shelter for decades. But there were inconsistencies that I couldn't ignore. Sometimes I noticed that the labels on our canned goods were newer than they should have been, given how long we'd supposedly been in the shelter. And once I could have sworn I heard distant traffic noises while Dad was in the shower, sounds that should have been impossible if the world above had been destroyed. Slowly, a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. What if there had never been a nuclear war? What if Dad had made it all up? The thought was almost too horrible to contemplate, but once it took root, I couldn't shake it. I began to watch Dad more closely, looking for any slip-ups or signs that might confirm my suspicions. And then, one night, I saw something that changed everything. It was late, well past the time when Sarah and I were supposed to be asleep. I'd woken up thirsty and was about to get some water when I heard the unmistakable sound of the shelter door opening. Peering around the corner, I saw Dad slipping out into the basement beyond, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. My heart pounding, I crept after him. I reached the shelter door just as it was swinging closed and managed to wedge my foot in to keep it from sealing shut. Through the crack, I could see Dad climbing the basement stairs. For a moment, I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, gathering all my courage, I eased the door open and followed him. The basement was dark and musty, filled with shadows that seemed to reach for me with grasping fingers. I'd almost forgotten what it looked like after years in the shelter. Carefully, I made my way up the stairs, my heart thundering so loudly I was sure Dad would hear it. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The door to the main house was slightly ajar, and through it I could hear muffled sounds, normal, everyday sounds that shouldn't exist in a post-apocalyptic world. The hum of a refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the soft whisper of wind through trees. Trembling, I pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen of my childhood home. Moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a scene that was both achingly familiar and utterly shocking. Everything was normal. Clean dishes in the rack by the sink, a calendar on the wall showing the current year, years after we'd entered the shelter, a bowl of fresh fruit on the counter. The world hadn't ended. It had gone on without us, oblivious to our underground prison. I heard the front door open and close, and panic seized me. Dad would be back any moment. As quietly as I could, I raced back down to the basement and into the shelter, pulling the door shut behind me just as I heard his footsteps on the stairs above. I dove into my bunk, my mind reeling from what I'd discovered. The truth was somehow worse than any nuclear apocalypse could have been. Our own father had been lying to us for years, keeping us trapped in this underground hell for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. As I lay there in the dark, listening to Dad re-enter the shelter, I knew that everything had changed. The truth was out there, just beyond that steel door, and somehow, someway, I was going to find a way to get Sarah and myself back to it. But little did I know, my midnight discovery was just the beginning. The real horrors and the fight for our freedom were yet to come. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay awake, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd seen. The world above was alive, thriving, completely oblivious to our subterranean nightmare. nightmare. Every creak and groan of the shelter now seemed to mock me, a constant reminder of the lie we'd been living. As the artificial dawn broke in our windowless prison, I watched Dad go through his usual morning routine. He checked the non-existent radiation levels, inspected our dwindling supplies, and prepared our meager breakfast rations. All of it a carefully orchestrated performance, I now realized. But for what purpose? What could drive a man to lock away his own children and deceive them so completely? I struggled to act normally, terrified that Dad would somehow sense the change in me. Sarah, sweet innocent Sarah, remained blissfully unaware. I caught her eyeing the bland, reconstituted eggs on her plate with poorly concealed disgust, and my heart ached. How much of her childhood had been stolen? How much of mine? Michael, Dad's gruff voice snapped me out of my reverie. You're awfully quiet this morning. Everything okay, son? I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as sickly as it felt. Yes, sir. Just tired, I guess. He studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. Had I imagined the flicker of suspicion that crossed his face? Well, buck up. We've got a lot to do today. I want to run a full systems check on the air filtration units. The day dragged on, each minute an eternity. I went through the motions of our daily routine, all the while my mind working furiously to process everything I knew and plan our escape. But the harsh reality of our situation soon became clear. Dad held all the cards. He controlled the food, the water, the very air we breathed, and most crucially, he controlled the door. That night, after Dad had gone to sleep, I carefully shook Sarah awake. Her eyes, still heavy with sleep, widened in confusion as I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling for silence. Quietly, I led her to the far corner of the shelter, as far from Dad's bunk as possible. Sarah, I whispered, my heart pounding, I need to tell you something important, but you have to promise to stay calm and quiet, okay? She nodded, fear and curiosity warring in her expression. Taking a deep breath, I told her everything. About sneaking out of the shelter, about the untouched world I'd seen above. With each word, I watched the color drain from her face. But that's impossible, she stammered, her voice barely audible. Dad said the radiation. I know what Dad said, I cut her off gently, but he lied to us, Sarah. I don't know why, but he's been lying this whole time. Tears welled up in her eyes and I pulled her into a tight hug. What are we going to do? She sobbed into my shoulder. We're going to get out of here, I promise, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I don't know how yet, but we will. We just need to be patient and wait for the right moment. Little did I know how long that wait would be, or how high the cost of our freedom would climb. The next few weeks were a special kind of torture. Every moment felt like walking on a knife's edge. We went about our daily routines, pretending everything was normal, all while watching Dad for any opportunity to escape. But he was vigilant, almost obsessively so. The shelter door remained firmly locked, the key always on a chain around his neck. Sarah struggled to maintain the pretense. I'd often catch her staring longingly at the door, or flinching away from Dad's touch. More than once I had to distract him when her eyes welled up with tears for no apparent reason. As for me, I threw myself into learning everything I could about the shelter systems. I volunteered to help Dad with maintenance tasks, memorizing every pipe, wire, and vent. Knowledge, I reasoned, would be our best weapon when the time came to act. It was during one of these maintenance sessions that I made a chilling discovery. We were checking the integrity of the shelter's outer walls when I noticed something odd, a small section that sounded hollow when tapped. Dad quickly ushered me away, claiming it was just a quirk of the construction, but I knew better. That night, while the others slept, I carefully examined the wall. It took hours of painstaking searching, but eventually I found it. A hidden panel, cunningly disguised. My hands shaking, I managed to pry it open. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Stacks of newspapers, their dates spanning the years we'd been underground. Printed emails from Dad's work, asking about his extended family emergency leave. And most damning of all, a small journal filled with Dad's frantic scribblings. I didn't have time to read it all, but what I did see painted a picture of a man spiraling into paranoid delusion. Dad wrote about protecting us from a world he saw as irredeemably corrupt and dangerous. He convinced himself that keeping us in the shelter was the only way to ensure our safety and purity. As I carefully replaced everything and sealed the panel, a new fear gripped me. We weren't just dealing with a liar or a kidnapper. We were trapped underground with a madman. The next morning, Dad announced a new addition to our daily routine: decontamination showers. He claimed it was an extra precaution against against radiation, but the gleam in his eyes told a different story. He was tightening his control, adding another layer to his elaborate fantasy. The showers were cold and uncomfortable, but it was the violation of privacy that hurt the most. Dad insisted on supervising to ensure we were thorough. I saw the way his gaze lingered on Sarah, and something dark and angry unfurled in my chest. We had to get out, and soon. Opportunity came in the form of a malfunction in the water filtration system. Dad was forced to go to his hidden cache of supplies for replacement parts. It was a risk, but it might be our only chance. Sarah, I whispered urgently as soon as Dad had left the main room. Remember what I taught you about the door mechanism? She nodded, her face pale but determined. Good. When I give the signal, I need you to run to the control panel and enter the emergency unlock code. Can you do that? Another nod. Okay, I'm going to create a distraction. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, don't stop until that door's open. Promise me. I promise, she whispered back, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for what I had to do. I'd never deliberately hurt anyone before, let alone my own father. But as I thought of Sarah's haunted eyes, of the years stolen from us, I knew I had no choice. I waited until I heard Dad's footsteps approaching, then I put our plan into action. I yanked hard on one of the water pipes I'd secretly loosened earlier, letting out a yell of surprise as it burst, spraying water everywhere. Dad came running, and in the chaos that followed, I made my move. As he bent to examine the broken pipe, I brought the heavy wrench down on the back of his head. He crumpled to the floor, a look of shocked betrayal on his face as he lost consciousness. Fighting back the wave of nausea and guilt, I shouted to Sarah, "Now, do it now." She sprang into action, her small fingers flying over the control panel. I heard the blessed sound of locks disengaging, and then the door was swinging open. Come on. I grabbed Sarah's hand and we ran, our bare feet slapping against the cold concrete of the basement floor, up the stairs, through the kitchen that still looked so surreal in its normalcy, and finally out the front door. The outside world hit us like a physical blow. The sun, so much brighter than we remembered, seared our eyes. The wind, carrying 1,000 scents we'd almost forgotten, nearly knocked us off our feet. For a moment we stood frozen on the front porch, overwhelmed by sensations we'd been deprived of for so long. Then we heard it, a groan from inside the house. Dad was waking up. Panic lent us speed. Hand in hand we ran down the street, ignoring the shocked stares of neighbors we no longer recognized. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, the sounds of pursuit, real or imagined, spurring us on. Finally, we collapsed in a park several blocks away, gasping for breath. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were free, yes, but we were also alone, confused, and terribly vulnerable in a world that had moved on without us. Sarah burst into tears, the events of the day finally overwhelming her. I held her close, my own eyes stinging as I whispered soothing nonsense and stroked her hair. It's okay, I told her, trying to convince myself as much as her. We're out, we're safe now. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. Dad was still out there, and I had no doubt he would come looking for us. And beyond that, how were we supposed to integrate back into a society we barely remembered? How could we explain where we'd been, what had happened to us? As the sun began to set on our first day of freedom, I realized with a sinking heart that our ordeal was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The world we emerged into was nothing like the post-apocalyptic wasteland our father had described. There were no piles of rubble, no radiation-scorched earth, no roaming bands of desperate survivors. Instead, we found ourselves in a typical suburban neighborhood, unchanged except for the passage of time. Houses stood intact, their windows gleaming in the fading sunlight. Neatly trimmed lawns stretched out before us. The scent of freshly cut grass almost overwhelming after years of recycled air. In the distance, we could hear the familiar sounds of modern life. Cars humming along roads, the faint chatter of a television from an open window, a dog barking at some unseen disturbance. It was jarringly, terrifyingly normal. As we stumbled through this alien familiar landscape, the full weight of our father's deception crashed down upon us. There had been no nuclear war, no worldwide catastrophe, no reason for us to have been locked away all these years. The realization was almost too much to bear. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why would Dad lie to us just like that. I had no answer for her. The enormity of what had been done to us was beyond my comprehension. How could a father willingly imprison his own children, robbing them of years of their lives? The man I thought I knew seemed to crumble away, leaving behind a stranger whose motives I couldn't begin to fathom. We made our way through the neighborhood, flinching at every car that passed, every person we saw in the distance. To them, we must have looked like wild creatures, barefoot, wide-eyed, dressed in the simple, utilitarian clothes we'd worn in the shelter. More than once, I caught sight of curtains twitching as curious neighbors peered out at us. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and I realized we needed to find shelter. The irony of the thought wasn't lost on me. After years of being trapped underground, we were now desperately seeking a roof over our heads. I think I know where we can go, I told Sarah, the ghost of a memory tugging at me. Do you remember Mrs. Callahan, Mom's friend from the hospital? Sarah's brow furrowed as she tried to recall. The nice lady with the cats? That's right, I said, relieved that at least some of our memories from before remained intact. She lived a few blocks from us, if she's still there. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We made our way through the darkening streets, every shadow seeming to hide a threat. More than once, I was sure I heard footsteps behind us, only to turn and find nothing there. Finally, we reached a small, well-kept house with a porch light glowing warmly. The nameplate by the door read Callahan, and I felt a surge of hope. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. Long moments passed. I was about to ring again when the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in our appearance. My God, she breathed. Michael, Sarah, is that really you? Before I could respond, she had pulled us into the house and enveloped us in a fierce hug. The familiar scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn years ago, brought tears to my eyes. We thought you were dead, Mrs. Callahan said, her voice choked with emotion. Your father said there had been an accident, that you'd all died. As she ushered us into her living room, plying us with blankets and promises of hot cocoa, the full extent of our father's lies began to unravel. There had been no accident, no tragedy to explain our disappearance. Just a man's descent into madness and the 2 children he dragged down with him. Mrs. Callahan listened in horror as we recounted our years in the shelter. Her face paled when we described the decontamination showers and the increasingly erratic behavior of our father. We have to call the police, she said, reaching for her phone. That man needs to be locked up for what he's done to you. But even as she dialed, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Something wasn't right. The feeling of being watched that had plagued me since our escape intensified. And then, with a jolt of terror, I realized what had been nagging at me. The house was too quiet. Where were Mrs. Callahan's cats? As if in answer to my unspoken question, a floorboard creaked behind us. We whirled around to see a figure standing in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. My heart stopped as I recognized the familiar silhouette. Dad, Sarah whimpered, shrinking back against me. He stepped into the room, and I saw that he was holding something, the length of pipe I'd used to strike him during our escape. His eyes, when they met mine, were cold and empty. I'm very disappointed in you, Michael, he said, his voice eerily calm. I thought I'd raised you better than this. Didn't I teach you about the dangers of the outside world? Mrs. Callahan moved to stand in front of us, her phone clutched in her hand. John, what have you done? These children are my children, Dad snarled, all pretense of calm evaporating, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them, even from themselves. He advanced into the room, the pipe raised threateningly. Mrs. Callahan stood her ground, but I could see her trembling. Run, she hissed at us. I'll hold him off, run. Everything happened so fast after that. Dad lunged forward. There was a sickening thud, and Mrs. Callahan crumpled to the floor. Sarah screamed, and then we were running again, out the back door and into the night. Behind us, I could hear Dad's heavy footsteps in his voice, once so comforting, now twisted with madness. Children, come back, it's not safe out there. But we knew the truth now. The only thing not safe was the man we'd once called father. As we fled into the darkness, weaving between houses and jumping fences, a new determination filled me. We were out now, we knew the truth, and no matter what it took, I was going to make sure we stayed free. But freedom, I was quickly learning, came with its own set of challenges, and the night was far from over. The next few hours were a blur of fear and adrenaline. Sarah and I ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like they would give out at any moment. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow seemed to hide our father's lurking form, but somehow we managed to evade him. As dawn broke, we found ourselves in a small park on the outskirts of town. Exhausted and with nowhere else to go, we huddled together on a bench, watching the world wake up around us. People jogged past, dogs barked in the distance, and the smell of fresh coffee wafted from a nearby cafe. It was all so beautifully, painfully normal. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and scared. Before I could answer, a police car pulled up beside the park. 2 officers got out, their eyes scanning the area before landing on us. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what we needed, help from the authorities. As the officers approached, I saw recognition dawn in their eyes. They'd been looking for us. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. We were taken to the police station where gentle-voiced detectives asked us questions about our time in the shelter. Social workers were called, and all the while, the search for our father intensified. They found him 3 days later, holed up in an abandoned building on the edge of town. He didn't go quietly. In the end, it took a team of negotiators and a SWAT unit to bring him in. The man they arrested bore little resemblance to the father we once knew. Wild-eyed and ranting about protecting his children from the corrupted world, he seemed more monster than man. The trial was a media sensation. Our story captivated the nation, sparking debates about mental health, parental rights, and the long-term effects of isolation. Experts were brought in to explain our father's descent into paranoid delusion. Some painted him as a victim of his own mind, while others condemned him as a monster. For Sarah and me, it was a painful process of reliving our trauma in the public eye, but it was also cathartic. Each testimony, each piece of evidence presented, helped to dismantle the false reality our father had constructed around us. In the end, he was found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to life in prison. As they led him away, he looked at us one last time. "I only wanted to keep you safe," he said, his voice breaking. It was the last time we ever saw him. The years that followed were challenging. Sarah and I had a lot to catch up on. Years of education, social development, and life experiences that had been stolen from us. We underwent intensive therapy, learning to process our trauma and adjust to life in the real world. It wasn't easy. There were nightmares, panic attacks, and moments when the outside world felt too big, too overwhelming. Simple things that others took for granted, like going to a crowded mall or watching fireworks on the 4th of July, could trigger intense anxiety for us. But slowly, painfully, we began to heal. We learned to trust again, to form relationships with others. We discovered the joys of simple freedoms, the feeling of rain on our skin, the taste of fresh fruit, the simple pleasure of choosing what to wear each day. Sarah threw herself into her studies, making up for lost time with a voracious appetite for knowledge. She's in college now, studying psychology with a focus on trauma and recovery. She wants to help others who have gone through similar experiences. As for me, I found solace in writing. Putting our story down on paper was terrifying at first, but it became a way to exorcise the demons of our past. This account you're reading now, it's part of that process, but even now, years later, there are moments when the old fears creep back in. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I'm back in that underground prison. In those moments, I have to remind myself that it's over, that we're safe now. Yet a part of me wonders if we'll ever truly be free. The shelter may have been a physical place, but its walls still exist in our minds. We carry it with us, a secret bunker built of memories and trauma. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I catch myself checking the locks on the doors, scanning the horizon for mushroom clouds that will never come. Because the most terrifying truth I've learned is this: the real fallout isn't radiation or nuclear winter. It's the lasting impact of a parent's betrayal, the half-life of trauma that continues long after the danger has passed. And that, I fear, may never fully decay. So if you're reading this, remember, the most dangerous lies aren't always the ones we're told by others. Sometimes they're the ones we tell ourselves to feel safe. Question everything, cherish your freedom, and never take the simple joys of life for granted, because you never know when someone might try to lock them away. Back in April of 2013, I went through something that I haven't been able to talk about. I was paid a significant amount of money to stay quiet, in return for signing a 10-year agreement to shut the hell up. Now that the time is up, I've considered my options. I could just let this go and never speak of it again. I won't gain anything from speaking out, and I got a lot to lose. But then again, this is just an anonymous post online. Words have less meaning that way. West Virginia. It was hotter than usual without a whiff of wind. I was coming home from a visit to my aunt. She'd broken her leg and couldn't leave her house. I was making my way back home, taking the I-64 out of Lewisburg. It started with the radio. It was playing that one Macklemore song I'd heard 100 times over. The sound was cutting in and out in a quick staccato, then disappeared completely. I could hear cars honking up front as a line began to form. There was a sway in the trees, as if greater and greater pressure was being put on them. I could hear wind rushing against the left side of the car, forcing me to pull the other way to compensate. I closed the sunroof as a dust cloud blew past, staining the windshield. Then a rumble. It sounded like thunder, but from the ground, like a groaning bellow, growing louder and clearer by the second. As it reached its peak, I could see trees toppling over. A small Kia got pushed off balance and swerved off the road. As the sound died down, the road devolved into chaos. Some were desperately changing lanes, others were stepping on the brakes. I got my door scraped as the car behind me sped past. The radio was playing an automated message, a local emergency alert referred to as a geological event. We were asked to turn off all air conditioning, slow down, and divert to the nearest exit. It repeated in a monotone voice. Geological event, no air conditioning, slow down, divert to nearest exit. Minutes passed. There was a line forming further down the road, police officers blocking the lanes in all directions, leaving a highway exit as the only option. Some folks were trying to push past the barricades, but were forced back at gunpoint. I could see officers wearing gas masks and riot shields. We were waved in. I followed the exit and got directed to the right. There was an open field that was used as a sort of impromptu parking lot. Cars were being waved in and parked in a way that boxed us in, leaving no room for us to open our doors in either direction unless we got parked at the edge. 4 lines of cars with about 10 to 15 vehicles per line. Surplus vehicles were directed further down the road. The place was packed. I got stuck in the second row, about 6 cars in. Pretty much everyone around me were on their phones. I didn't have anyone to call, but there seemed to be an issue getting a signal through. The radio was still repeating the emergency message. Voices were getting louder. A man 2 cars to my left leaned out of a gap in the door, screaming at the officers to answer his question. They responded immediately with a warning shot straight into the air. "Stay in your vehicle," they screamed. "Lock your doors, I'm not telling you again." A couple of folks were filming, but there seemed to be trouble uploading. We were losing bandwidth. It didn't take long until phone signals were completely blocked. I think a video or 2 of that officer firing into the air made it online. They were patrolling back and forth. We were told to stay in our vehicles, windows up, doors closed and locked, engines off. I could hear people talking in the other cars. Someone said there had been a natural gas leak from the geological event and that combustible engines could spark an explosion. Others were talking about a terrorist attack. There were no answers and the officers weren't eager to talk. After about an hour, things were getting ugly. People were hungry, thirsty, and restless. One officer stepped up on the front cars, handing out water bottles, crackers, and processed cheese slices. He had to step from one car to another, denting the hoods with his steel-tipped shoes. They were also handing out thick black plastic hygiene bags for people who needed to relieve themselves. Use them, seal them, drop them out the door, then lock up and wait. I'd crawled into the back seat, pulled down my cap, and tried to relax. I'd been playing some games on my phone, but the battery was running low. I wanted to save some, so I settled for having a nap instead. The sweat was stinging my eyes, not because of how warm it was, but because of how nervous I was. No matter what I did, I felt trapped, and the car felt smaller and smaller. I couldn't get out if I wanted to, and it physically hurt me to think about how little control I had. Is that what claustrophobia feels like? A couple of officers were discussing something by the front line. One of them had a white cotton glove on, which he used to wipe off the hood of one of the front cars. The glove was taken off and put into a bag, which in turn was sealed with a hot air gun. I was getting the impression that our cars had been covered in something. I wasn't the only one considering it. There were 2 college kids in the car to my left, and they were discussing it too. "Anthrax," one of them said. "Gotta be." "Nah, gold dust," the other chuckled. "They don't want to share." "You know what?" the first groaned. "I honest to God hope you're right. You're not, but I hope you are." "Screw you." I joined in the conversation shortly after. I offered another explanation, something combustible, something that might blow up if we started our cars. They were willing to consider this. The car behind me couldn't hear us, but the driver held up a notebook with the text. "If we do know what it's go to be aliens." I couldn't tell if they were serious, but they weren't laughing about it. A man in his 50s and what looked like his daughter. There were a couple of other folks in the other cars. A man in a black shirt sort of looked like a preacher without a collar. 2 middle middle-aged women with a kid in the back seat, a fat man blaring Johnny Cash from his stereo, a couple with a teenage son who couldn't stop drumming on the windows. We'd been stuck for about 2, maybe 2.5 hours when a truck rolled in, one of those with a large water tank. It was unmarked, looked civilian. As it rolled in, they were calling out on the megaphone. "We'll be hosing your vehicles down," they said. "Keep everything locked and closed. Then we'll be covering your vehicle with protective plastic while we wait for it to dry. After that, we'll start letting you go in an orderly manner." I repeat, most of us were relieved. It was only a matter of time now. It was getting dark. They were getting up on the cars, hosing them down thoroughly. It smelled of chlorine, so maybe they'd mixed something into the water. As they came to my car, they stepped up on it and double-checked the sunroof, making sure it was locked and secured. They sprayed the car down, bathing it in chemical stink, the kind that gets stuck to the back of your throat. It took a long time for them to finish, at least an hour or 2. After that, they were rolling out a kind of plastic cover at the short side of the lot, the kind you use to protect pools or rain covers for football fields. They used 2 squad cars to slowly drape the thing over the entire lot, securing the edges with large rocks. "Please stay calm," they called out as the plastic crawled over us. "I know this is uncomfortable, but this is for your own safety. Once the cleaning is done, you will be free to go. Stay inside your vehicle at all times." I repeat, I did as I was told. I stayed inside, and I watched that plastic cover sweep over me. It felt like getting buried alive. All lights went out, leaving me in complete darkness, accompanied only by the vague, disembodied voices of the others. The college kids were talking about where they were going to go after this. Someone was honking, not sure if it was to show support or discontent. Someone else was cheering. I took my last swig of water, washing down my final plain cracker. I got back in the driver's seat. I could hear as they finished moving the plastic cover and parking their squad vehicles. I waited patiently, figuring it'd be maybe another hour or so. They hadn't really given us a timeline, but I could breathe a little easier. Sort of. I was going back and forth between feeling empowered with my hands on the wheel and feeling like I was stuck in a metal coffin. It was so dark and everything smelled of plastic and chemicals, like a car wash stuck in time. As the excitement died down, I paid more attention to the background sounds. I tried to filter out the various discussions from the nearby cars, and somewhere in the distance I heard raised voices. It wasn't coming from the cars, but the officers. Whatever they were talking about, it was a heated discussion. An hour came and went, and people were getting impatient. More cars were honking, others were yelling, demanding answers. I couldn't get my leg to stop shaking. The more I thought about getting out of there, the smaller the car felt. I was hyper-focusing on things I couldn't control. I was a little thirsty, and I was out of water. I needed to use the bathroom. I wanted to stretch my legs and go for a walk. I wanted to breathe fresh air and get that awful chemical taste out of my mouth. I heard cars starting, accelerating. The truck was moving somewhere off to the side. "We need you to stay in your vehicle." A voice screamed over the megaphone, "Do not leave for any reason. Stay in your vehicle." Cars speeding off, not many but a couple. Then quiet. The officers left us there. Everyone was quiet. A couple of folks had opened up their phones, using them as flashlights to look from car to car. Looking out at the sea of vehicles, all of us trapped under that dark cover, I could see a handful of lights cut off by sharp silhouettes. I couldn't make out who was who in the dark. It was all just people. Anonymous. I heard a gasp somewhere in the back. There was a metallic clunk like when the officers climbed atop our cars to get us our water. There was a careful cheer as some folks figured they were taking off the plastic cover. But that wasn't it. Instead, there were more footsteps. The cheers slowly died down as more and more footsteps pattered across our cars. I stopped counting after a dozen. The silhouettes in the other cars were still. We all held our breaths waiting for an answer to show itself. What the hell was going on? What was that sound? Somewhere off to my right I heard a voice. "Who's up there?" It sounded like an older man. I'd seen a pickup truck that way earlier. Almost as a response, the footsteps stopped. There was a faint clicking sound, like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. Click, click. And from further away, a click in response. From somewhere to my left, another couple clicks. Then a cascade of clicks. Dozens, maybe hundreds. There was an awful metallic noise coming from my right, then breaking glass. A scream cut short, followed by several irregular taps of the car horn. One One of the silhouettes in the distance turned into a blur as something passed through the windshield, cutting through the plastic cover. Somewhere in the front row, the roof of a car was cut wide open. Someone was pulled up out of their seat. 2 cars back from where I was, there was more glass breaking. It sounded like a wild animal got in. I could see a weak hint of red spattered against the passenger side windows. I wasn't getting any air. I could feel my heart beating through my chest as my arms started shaking. My hands were cramped around the steering wheel, and I felt sweat dripping down my shoulders. I couldn't control it. I didn't even see what was going on, but these sounds, these screams, they awakened something primal. This was danger, a threat. My body knew long before I did. The college kids in the other car were ducking down. One of them waved a hand at me as if telling me to get down. I nodded. I scrambled into the back seat. I couldn't see where I was putting my hands or my feet. Everything is different in the dark. As I tumbled my way over, my foot accidentally tapped the car horn. It was a quick tap, a fraction of a second, but to me it was the loudest sound in the world. I was lying on my stomach in the back seat, and within seconds something heavy climbed onto the hood of my car. I could feel the car buckling. It was much heavier than the man who'd passed out water bottles. I held my hands in front of my mouth to stop the panting, but I just ended up snorting up sweat instead. My nose stung as I bit my tongue, listening to every metallic groan as whatever was outside moved and shifted. Click, click, and from behind my car, a click in response. There were no lights being held up anymore. Everyone was cowering, going quiet. I pushed myself up against the door behind the driver's seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear the frame of the car complain as something slowly moved. When it came to my sunroof, there was a slight crack. That made it stop. Another crack. I silently shook my head as if trying to ask the car to stop. That thing was going to break, and it did. My legs were showered with glass as a big blob of plastic cover dipped into my car. Something big came tumbling into the front seat, still covered in protective plastic. It twitched and spun around, its clicking turning from a careful question-like noise to a never-ending barrage. It was calling for help, alerting others, and it was cutting its way through the plastic. There were footsteps coming from every direction, some of them leaping from car to car, some of them leaping far enough to skip a car as they hurried. I was going to be swarmed within seconds. I fumbled with my hands, accidentally cutting my thumb on the broken glass. I managed to open the passenger side door, but even at its widest, and even when pressing into the college kid's car, it wasn't enough room to get out. Still, I had to try. I pressed myself into the gap and exhaled as much as I could, flattening my chest. While the thing thrashed around inside my car, I could feel my vision going faint. Black spots popped up at the edge of my vision. My arms were going weak, and yet by some miracle I made it through. As my face hit the gravel of the makeshift parking lot, I felt the burn of residual chemicals. I swallowed my instinct to run, instead staying on my stomach, forcing myself to crawl under my car. There were more of them, some climbing on, some off. My chest was pressed to the ground as the weight shifted. I heard breaking glass from the windshield and tearing fabric. Something was stuck up there and it was furious, like a trapped animal. I could hear the college kids mumbling to one another, trying to stay calm, one assuring the other that all they had to do was stay low, stay quiet, and wait. Then something slammed into the passenger side door, the one I'd crawled out of. The door was pressed up against the neighboring car, then fell haphazardly to the ground, completely off the hinges. An ink-black, bird-like foot touched the ground right next to me. I've looked it up since. There were 3 toes forward, 1 toe backward, all clawed. Anisodactyl feet similar to that of many birds of prey, except larger than a human foot and with smooth, oil-slick skin. It must have been heavy, at least 400 pounds. If the clicking noise came from its mouth, I can approximate that it was somewhere around 6 feet 7 to 6 feet 9. Or taller, it could have been hunched over. How it managed to walk in the gap between the vehicles is beyond me, but I suspect it was very thin. It daintily walked from my car to the others as if scanning for something. I could barely see anything in the dark, but this thing seemed to navigate it perfectly. It didn't bump into anything. There was a tap on the glass of the car behind me to my right, and someone got startled. A short scream and the hunt was on. This time was different. It must have caused some kind of chain reaction, as all of a sudden the plastic cover was getting torn up left and right. People were clawing their way out of their cars. I heard someone kicking against their windshield. Another was trying to open their door. I could hear it slamming against the side of the car next to them. And off in the distance there was gunfire. Just a couple of shots. The college kids in the car next to me slammed their doors open and followed my lead. They rolled onto the ground and under their car. There was a little more light coming in as the cover had been torn above. Their faces were red from tears, and one of them was desperately trying to call for help on his phone. The other grabbed the phone out of his hand sand. A short scuffle ensued, ending with them putting on a ringtone and sliding the thing as far to the left as they could. Whatever car that phone landed under was demolished. Every window broken, every passenger gone. I could hear the grinding as the seat was ripped in two and thrown away. In a matter of seconds, an entire vehicle was torn to pieces as a dozen of those things swarmed it. "Shut up," one of the college kids repeated. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." Something reached under my car. It scraped against the sole of my shoe, tearing a hole all the way to my big toe. I hurried forward, scurrying like a lizard. The college kids noticed and followed suit. I don't think they thought about it too much. It was just movement and they went for it. I made it 2 cars down before I got stuck. There was something dark in the way and I couldn't get around it without exposing myself. I couldn't see what it was, but it didn't take long for me to figure it out. There was a meaty crunch, as if someone was biting chunks out of a piece of meat. It was struggling to get through the fabric of their clothes, making a snapping noise as threads gave way. A pool of blood rolled under the car, staining the tip of my fingers. It was still warm. One of those things were eating a victim. I hunkered down, trying to remember to breathe, and I stayed there waiting for a chance, any chance. I must have stayed there for at least an hour, hearing every bite, every crack of bone and snap of sinew, satisfied clicking noises. As it finished its meal, it wandered off, dragging the remains along. They were moving forward. Something heavy walked over the car I was hiding under, dragging a body along. Slowly, the footsteps disappeared. It was quiet again, and in that quiet, I found my footing. I made my way to the edge of the plastic cover. I listened one final time, pushed one of the weights away, and slipped through. They were gone, and I was out. I could feel my chest growing lighter, allowing me to breathe. I wanted to cry from relief. A breeze was picking up, drying the sweat on my brow and carrying the smell of grass. Stepping back, I turned towards the sea of cars to see how bad the damage was. And then I saw one. It was a bit off to the side, perching on top of an old Honda. At a glance, it looked like a tall person, covered in a slick black ink. But looking closer, you could see the strange bird-like feet, the pointed nails, the long row of shark-like teeth on a mouth that was far too wide. I froze. The thing rose to its full length, easily over 7 feet tall. It looked ready to pounce on me. I had nothing to defend myself with. I couldn't make any sudden moves. I wouldn't even be halfway under the car before that thing would be over me. 100 thoughts raced through my mind, but there was nothing I could do. I was out of options, but the thing just looked at me. It raised a slice of raw meat. Blood dripped onto the plastic cover. It looked at me curiously, taking a bite. Then, as if nothing had happened, it wandered off, satiated. I was left there, shaking like a dry leaf. And with the last of those things gone, all that was left was the panic. It didn't take long for the officers to return. The plastic cover was removed, but we couldn't go home. Not after this. Some folks signed a waiver and were let go immediately. They weren't allowed to talk about what they'd seen, and in return, they'd get a hefty sum of insurance money. Others demanded answers and were taken into custody for obstruction of justice. A few others still were too panicked to make any kind of sense and had to be checked out by medical personnel. A total of 14 people died. It was described by a combination of causes: a traffic pileup, carbon monoxide poisoning, animal attack. I think there was something about an escaped convict too. Excuses all over the place, and the times were all wrong, spread out through a couple of days to more smoothly blend into accident statistics. And if you wanted to go home and get your insurance money, you had to sign a non-disclosure. I did too. I know the college kids did as well. It was a miracle they made it out, but I saw them. 34 cars had to be towed, 18 people wounded, 6 seriously so. 4 people lost at least one limb. One guy had an arm ripped off halfway up his collarbone. I don't know how he survived. Most people never saw those things up close. They just remember the screams and the breaking glass. Sometimes at night, that's all I hear too. Closing my eyes reminds me of lying under those cars, feeling the pressure as the weight shifted. I still get trouble breathing. I think a part of me is still stuck there. It stayed in my vehicle. The summer I got a job here, I was 17 and it was a good year. Ellen Ditsworth used to work the hot dog stand, and we'd sneak cigarettes under the beams of the Dragon Slayer ride, cringing and giggling as the cars went overhead, dripping water all over us. Wet hands and damp cigarettes. But it was near her station, and I think she found it funny to get splashed. It was out of the way too. It was always quiet and cool down there, even in the summer heat. If any of the ride goers smelled our cigarette smoke as they hurtled overhead, they didn't say anything. everything. One time, when we fumbled around and flirted, I kissed her fingers and they smelled like an ashtray. I still think about it to this day. I was 22 when they offered me the winter job. Ellen was long gone by then. No more bright red short shorts and poorly shaven legs that she'd invite me to stroke under the pretense of showing just how bad she was with a razor. There were other girls, but by the time the final summer rolled around, I'd long felt uncomfortable hanging out with new hires. Sometimes I'd stand there listening to them talk and I'd feel lonelier than I had when I was by myself. I was thinking about my future around this time when the manager told me he had an opportunity for me to make good cash. They needed someone to stick around and keep the place ticking while everyone went back to the real world. Usual guy had walked and they needed someone bad. Last day before the park shut for winter was always Halloween, and that was only because it had a fireworks show. After that it turned into a ghost town and I'd be on my own. I'd get a trailer to sleep in and I could use my own car to get to the closest shop. The park would pay some of my gas, not all of it, but enough to help out. Only real problem was I'd be alone. Not that the place was a desert island. There were 2 towns within easy driving distance, and I could have friends around so long as we didn't mess with the rides. But other than that, I'd be the only staff member on hand for the entire 4 months. Security guard and janitor rolled into one. I agreed, but I told him when the park reopened in March I'd be done. I figured it was time to move on, get a degree like some of my friends had, or maybe my dad could help me out with a job somewhere. World was wide open to me, and I figured I'd sit on my butt all winter, make a crap ton on overtime, and then go on to some new adventure where I'd meet another Ellen Ditzworth or two. Yesterday I turned 38 and I'm still in the park. Government signs my checks now. Couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. Probably after the media got wind of Denise Surrey, who broke in with her friends and never left. A lot of kids have gone missing here over the years, but she was the one who went mainstream. Her parents were doctors and she had blue eyes, so she got just enough attention to get the news cameras out. When the fuss died and the media moved on to its next story, some government guys came and installed 8-foot steel palisade fences, gave me the keys to the only gate and scarpered real quick. Gave me a funny feeling seeing 4 men in suits, barrel-chested with pistols on their hips, climb into an unmarked vehicle and accelerate out the parking lot so fast the back of the car fishtailed. One of them looked over his shoulder at the park and he was so scared it was like he was looking at a mushroom cloud. I was the one who found Denise. She'd gone crawling headfirst down the Astro Missile water slide, one of those up and down kind of slides that have you bouncing along on a padded dinghy. Rides like that are usually open top, but this had long sections in a closed tunnel with LED lights to look like stars. Thing is, depending on weight, some people would catch air and hit the top of those tunnels going 20 miles per hour, maybe more. We used to take turns going in there to pull out any teeth that had got stuck in the roof. 15 years later and that tunnel mouth looked like something out of a nightmare. Fairy moss covering the opening, darkness inside heavier than the night around it, bone dry and with no obvious way to safety. Denise died of thirst. They think she was in there for 6 days, crawling around in the pitch black looking for an exit that should never have been more than 100 feet away. There were signs something was wrong with this place back when it was still open. I just didn't register them. There were the injuries and accidents that are common in every water park, but we had a couple hundred serious ones every year, usually one a day. Tried to mitigate it with safety measures, but half the time they didn't work. Radios would bug out when you try sending a warning. Repair guys would get lost, calling up angry saying the road just kept going right forever and they'd had enough of this crap. Out of order signs would go missing. Sometimes kids would insist some staff member had waved them through on a closed attraction. They'd be so adamant I started to believe them. I think the manager did too. He made it policy to have name tags on us at all times, and if the kids said whoever gave them the go-ahead didn't have one on, he'd tell us all to forget it, like it wasn't even worth trying to figure out who needed a disciplinary. I had it happen once where I radioed to the guy at the top of one slide and told him to stop any kids coming down. The last one had come out bleeding and looking unresponsive, and I wanted to check on him. I remember pulling him out of the water and looking at this boy all slack and pale as a sheet of paper with blue lips, so cold it hurt just to hold him, and I wondered if I was holding someone dead, when out of nowhere another kid slammed into me so hard I went under. Scared me beyond myself, cause for a second or two it was like I couldn't see the surface of the pool, almost like there wasn't one, just blue forever and ever. Before I could start to panic, my feet found the floor and I surfaced only to see the kid I'd been holding seconds ago standing there looking worried. He was the picture of good health. Asked if I was okay, said sorry for hitting me when he came out the slide, but really it was my own own dumb fault for standing there in the first place. Guy at the top swore on his life he'd never got any radio message from me. I put it all down to the head injury, which was bad enough the owner made someone drive me to the emergency room. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was the park having its fun with me. Could have been worse. You could say it likes to play tricks, but those tricks are mean as hell, and over the years they've only got worse. Despite all I've told you so far, the first winter alone wasn't as bad as you might think. Creepy as hell walking around all those rides that were usually so busy and full of life. Tarpaulins pulled across all those pools, big and small, moving with gentle susurrations in the icy winds. It wasn't great in the day, overcast and dreary, the air seemingly blue, but at night it was even worse. I made those rounds quickly, stopping sometimes to summon what little bravery I had to shine a light in the pitch black toilets, or to check one of the changing stalls dotted around the place. Things went missing a lot, moved around. Once one of the rides came to life at 3 a.m., and I woke to the sound of tinny music echoing throughout the park, but winter came and went without any real incident. First day the park reopened, I went to see the manager and slipped in some water, broke my left arm and did a number on my back. Owner was so scared of being sued he threw money at me, told me he'd cover the medical bills and sit me up in my trailer and pay me to do nothing. Nothing. What was I gonna do? I'd arranged to start another job on a construction site in a few weeks, and there was no hope of me doing that kind of work with my injuries. I needed money and had no other way of making it. I agreed to stick around until I felt better, but unfortunately I never felt better. Winter soon rolled around again, and the same deal as last time was back on the table. He needed someone on site, and I needed money. I took it thinking another few months in the park wasn't so bad. I was wrong. Second time round was a lot worse. Part of it was me, 23 years old and with a bad back, drinking most nights and struggling with the prescription painkillers. Spent most days haunted by the strange feeling that my life's honeymoon phase was over. Hardly any friends accepted my invite to come spend a couple weeks, and those that did weren't around long. Couldn't tell you if that was just us growing apart, as friends often do, or the park's strange influence. Dave came round with his girlfriend for a couple nights. She grouched the whole time, hated sleeping in the trailer while I stayed in a tent outside, but she hated the park too, said she felt watched all the time. Trip was cut short when we found her screaming one morning. She was pointing at one of the slides saying something had come out of it and was in the pool swimming around, but when we looked we didn't see nothing. She did have a hell of a bite on her ankle though, funny shape to it. Dave looked at it and got real freaked out. They left in a hurry. Another car's tires screeching as it hauled out of there at top speeds. Never did figure out what happened, but if she didn't like the park, well, I guess it didn't like her either. Not that I was much safer. Found myself getting cut up like crazy doing basic odd jobs. Things broke all the time, even if they'd been fine for years and years. And then one night I came into my trailer to find a drowned possum on the little kitchen table. Poor thing was soaked in chlorine water that dripped onto the floor in a puddle. No marks going to or from it, like it just appeared there out of thin air. It stank like hell though. It had clearly been dead for days and days. I gingerly dropped it into a garbage bag using a pair of tongs and threw the lot in a dumpster, but I still couldn't spend more than a few seconds in the trailer without gagging, so I slept in the tent instead. Pitched it as close as I could without picking up that smell, but I had a bad feeling the whole time I set it up, like I was being watched. By the time I was climbing inside, it was midnight and I was desperate to get to sleep and see the cold night turn to day. Barely an hour later and I had to climb back out of the tent because the trailer door was banging in the wind. Okay, I told myself as I shuffled over in my tighty whities, arms wrapped around my chest for warmth. That's my own stupid fault for leaving it open. I closed it in a hurry and went back to the tent but stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the zipper was pulled shut. I hadn't left it like that. I didn't know what to do. My brain went in two directions at the same time. One said I was mistaken. I had closed the tent and just forgotten it. The other said something or someone had crawled inside and was waiting for me. It had set the whole thing up as a trap, and the best thing to do was to get in my car and drive until the sun rose, but I was already half cut and knew I shouldn't be driving. The skeptical half of my brain made an appealing case. The world isn't a nightmare, it said. It can look like one sometimes, but it isn't real. If you hear a bump in the night, you go looking and find it was all nothing, and you take a deep breath, laugh at yourself for getting scared, and move on. Still, it took everything I had just to take a step towards the tent, and I shone my light at it hoping to see some sign of something in there. By the time my hand was on the zipper, I was shaking like a leaf and rethinking my ethical code of not driving drunk. But when emotions get that high, it's like you run on autopilot. Must be a survival thing. I opened the flap without really telling myself myself to, and then I was looking inside my tent and there was nothing there. I crawled inside quick as I could, pulled the zipper back the other way, and tried to go to sleep. I settled down for maybe another 30 minutes when something's hand pressed against the tent wall, and that was when I started screaming. The way it came at me, palm open, fingers spread, tent fabric stretching to near breaking point, makes my skin crawl just to remember it. Long fingers that tapered to a point, almost razor sharp, and a palm not much larger than a golf ball, even if the fingers spanned a dinner plate. In the nightmare reality of the moment, I saw it the way I might see a spider. Equal parts disgust and terror. I had to get away, and I backed up so fast I wound up rolling the whole tent like a hamster ball. Lost the zipper in the panic. Didn't find it again until the last scream finally left my lips, and I was forced to catch my breath in the silence of an empty night, accepting that whatever was out there was either laughing its butt off at me or waiting patiently. Either way, I was at its mercy. Only thing I could do was collect myself and leave the tent. When I finally climbed free, there was no one waiting for me, only a couple wet footprints going to the nearest pool. I considered pulling the tarpaulin back and looking, but I was already scared beyond myself and had no courage remaining. Instead, I ran into the trailer, slammed the door shut, barricaded it with every last piece of furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and fell asleep with the smell of rotten meat filling my lungs. Come morning, I was thankful for the sunlight and the feeling that last night's events were just a dream. After that, I locked my trailer door every night, and I never slept in that tent again. No more possums, but it isn't uncommon for me to find scratches and dents in my door each morning. Nothing serious, but looks to me like the probing of a curious animal. Couple days later, something locked me in the boys' bathroom near the east end of the park. I'd only gone in cause one of the faucets was running. I just turned it off when the door slammed shut and I couldn't get it open again. Had to kick the lock out, which isn't an easy thing to do. First kick, I nearly broke my ankle. Second time hurt just as bad, and I had to take a breather to cope with the pain. Found myself pacing and occasionally stopping to listen for any sign of someone waiting for me outside. Someone I could shout at, blame it all on. Anything to keep the anger churning and not let it turn to fear. It was a full hour before I got panicked enough to give it my all and finally broke the lock. Burst into the cold air, all red-faced and flustered, and found the park silent as a graveyard. Just those tarpaulins waving gently in the breeze. I learned some important lessons that winter. If you feel watched, feel like you're walking into a situation someone planned, it's because you are. When the park reopened, I was out of there without a moment's hesitation. Finally got that job on a construction site, and it lasted all of 3 weeks before I hurt my back again. Spent the rest of the summer laid up on my dad's sofa drinking and watching daytime TV. Got a call off the manager around August, and he told me it had been a bad summer. Not only had the cops been sniffing around like crazy cause some poor kid went missing in the area, but they'd had twice as many injuries as before. Said he just spent the day in court hearing testimony from the parents of some kid who'd never walk or feed himself again after he hit his head on one of the rides. He sounded pretty beat up about it. He wasn't the best boss, but it wasn't like we worked for Mr. Burns either. Poor guy was way out of his depth. Anyway, part of the court settlement was he had to have staff members on site 24/7. I'd done it twice before, and he was desperately in need of someone who knew the job. I nearly said no, but he told me it was me or some 17-year-old lifeguard who'd shown interest in the job, and I didn't like the thought of that. God help me, I accepted, and when I went back that third time, I took a gun, and this time I trusted my instincts. If I walked past a changing stall and heard the shower running, I let it run. Hour later, it'd be turned off again. If I saw someone had left the lights on in the staff room, I let them stay on until morning when I could deal with it in the comfort of daylight. Flushing toilets, wet footprints, open doors. I learned to stop sweating the little things, and 9 times out of 10, they went away on their own. Pretty soon I found myself laughing at them. A big fat wallet sitting in the middle of a solitary lounger that had been dragged into the moonlight. A phone ringing from somewhere in the depths of a maintenance hatch. Those kinds of crude tricks weren't going to work on me, I decided. Thought I had it all figured out and there was nothing left for that place to show me. And then the park ate a drifter. Or something did anyway. Did it right in front of me too. I'd found the guy sleeping in one of the brick and mortar bathrooms. We gotta keep those things warm enough to stop the pipes bursting, so I guess they make decent enough shelter. He was an agitated old guy. Called me all sorts as I told him to clear off. He didn't make for the main exit though. Wasn't like he parked a car in the lot, was it? Instead, he just made a beeline for the nearby hills. No fences in that part of the park back then, only open fields moving into woodland. His plan was to just walk into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and I wondered if I was actually marching some guy to a cold death. I remember looking at his shoes and seeing the backs of his heels exposed, and I realized I couldn't couldn't let him do that. Snow was due to fall that night and I knew it was gonna get real bad out there. "Hey," I cried out while slowing to a stop. "Look man, it's late, I'm sure." My words died out. I didn't really know what to say when he turned to face me. He was angry and tired and I knew he wasn't ever really gonna be thankful for some randomer's charity, but that didn't mean I shouldn't try. For a moment the only sound was the tarpaulin of the large pool to our right, was just about to cough up some more words when his feet went sideways. His body rotated around his center of mass, and the next part of him to touch solid ground was his head. It made a noise that makes my teeth ache just to think about, a percussive, almost musical note that really shouldn't be made by a human skull. The blood that sprayed across the tiles reminded me of when I'd go paintballing with my friends. I remember looking down at it and noticing a couple loose teeth. Strange feeling. For a few seconds everything turned to a kind of white noise as ancient instincts rooted me to the spot with fear, paralyzed me. Million thoughts went through my head. The guy was dead. Something had taken him. That blood used to be inside of him. I have blood inside of me. Does my blood look like that? These thoughts were like the sparks that fly off a loose electrical wire, but I was stuck mired in them until the whistling in my ears faded and I heard something being dragged across the floor. The guy hadn't even gone that far. He'd flown about 8 feet and landed just on the edge of the pool. His legs were in the water, hidden behind the tarpaulin, and only his top half was on dry land. His head was a ruin of blood and matted hair, but he still managed to look at me for just a moment before he slid the rest of the way below the water with a quiet splunk. The realization he was alive kicked my butt into my gear and I ran over to the circuit box and hit the button that pulls back the pool cover. Machine ran loud as it drew the blue heavy sheet back across the water. Felt like eternity waiting for it. When it was finally over and I could look down into the water and see clearly there was no one there. Not even a cloud of blood polluting the pool. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane, and I even looked over and double checked that the guy's plastic bag was still where he dropped it just so I could be sure I hadn't made the entire thing up. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing in that water were a couple leaves that had made it in there over fall, but that was it. And then I saw it. I can't explain it easily. It was a sudden overlap of realities, a bit like the hollow cube illusion where it can be two things at once. Without ever taking my eyes off it, that pool became every deep body of water I'd ever seen. All of them, all at once. It was every calm and glassy ocean surface with rays of diffuse light leading into unseen depths. Every lake with murky kelp fingers reaching up out of the dark. Every flooded basement with black and brackish water. I could smell the stagnant water, could feel the breeze you get standing on the coast, taste the salt, all of it at once. And something moved in those infinite waters and it was big. It was like the first time I saw the Grand Canyon big. Like when you get on a plane and see the ground pull away so quickly it loses perspective. Whatever was down there was coming right at me, and I'm not ashamed to say I pissed my pants. An ocean full of stars was down there, and the thing swimming towards me had a body that obscured entire nebulae. I felt vertigo come over me, and I backed away and I slipped in the blood, and then I woke up a few hours later and started screaming. I had to clean up in the morning, and I had to pull the tarpaulin back across. Machine only goes one way, so I had to do it with a pool stick, and it made me feel sick just to go near it. Every time I got close, I started to feel dizzy again. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was the same old pool it had always been, but I'd never shake the feeling I had when I was looking down in it and saw teeth like tectonic plates. When summer rolled back around, I saw a bunch of kids in that pool and had to go be sick in a bush. The thought of them sharing space with that thing, Jesus. After that, I felt like I belonged to the park, weird as it sounds. Manager didn't have to fight me to get me to stick around for a 4th winter or a 5th or 6th. The rest of the world didn't feel so real to me anymore. Sitting and eating dinner with my father while he lectured me on my prospects. Getting a beer with an old friend who was passing through. I felt like I'd gone into space and seen the world was flat, and now I had to just come on back and pretend like I cared about whether my soda was diet or not. Not long after that, the park had its last ever summer. It had gone too far by that point. Government was looking to close it all down on account of the accidents, and the manager was down the station every other day for questioning. 4 kids missing that year alone. I found one of them folded up inside a pool filter, but didn't report it on account of not wanting the attention. The rest I don't know about. I was told I'd be paid another month or so after closure until a demolition crew came in, but no one ever arrived. Just me, this place, and a back that's getting worse with each new winter. I don't patrol at night anymore. Little by little the park has become something unfamiliar to me. Grass growing up between old tiles, pool water the color of cut grass and engine oil. Even in the day, you can see things moving around down there, and the smell of chlorine no longer fills the air. Now it's the heavy stench of rotten algae and dead water, and sometimes the tang of the salty ocean that I've learned to avoid like the plague. Makes me see stars in the corner of my vision, and I don't like it. My dreams are bad enough. Drowning in the dark, something huge bearing down on me. I've woken up more than a few times and vomited up salt water. I can't bring myself to think what any of it means because I just don't want to know. Last time I went in the park after dark, I had a close call. Worst of my life. I've been thinking about leaving ever since, but I worry there's not much else out there for me at this stage. That, and I kind of feel guilty I didn't save all those kids with the cameras. Urban explorers they call themselves, and I say kids, but really they were college students who record videos for something called TikTok. Anyway, they came prepared, scouted the park, even scouted me, working out my routine and where my trailer is so they could avoid my general line of sight. I had no clue they'd watched me for a whole day. Once they figured I was passed out or asleep, they drove their van as close to the fence they could find, climbed the top and hopped on over. For about an hour they got what they wanted. I've watched the footage 100 times. Broken down toilets covered in graffiti, smashed windows and broken glass covering the floor, old pools full of ancient water covered in thick brackish scum. You can hear the glee in their voices. That kind of urban decay was their bread and butter, and they were good at it too. They stayed quiet, didn't shout or break anything. They just filmed. Wasn't until they decided to try rowing out to the castle that things took a turn. I came too late. What got me out of bed was a scream, maybe a few of them. It was blurry and I came to around 3 a.m. and still a little tipsy, my head foaming at the edges with a half-remembered dream of a hollow world filled with water. As soon as I saw the van, I realized someone had gotten inside the park, and I hadn't just been dreaming the sounds of splashing water and panicked. But by the time I went in there myself, the place was silent. I really didn't want to search it at night. I hadn't gone in there after dark for a few years and things had only gotten worse. Set something off inside me. A kind of spiritual Geiger counter is how I think of it. An intense primordial warning system that made the shadows around me look almost infinitely deep. More than that, I guess it felt alien. Sounds stupid, but it really did feel like I wasn't on the same planet anymore. I don't know. That part might just be all in my head, but that's how it felt that night. I'd pushed myself just about as far as I was willing to go when I heard it. A rhythmic, hollow knocking. It was coming from one of the largest pools in the park. A shallow, kid-friendly one we called the castle because it had a giant jungle gym in the center. A kind of spaghetti mess of platforms and climbing bars and slides that the kids loved. I followed the sound and saw a pile of rucksacks and even a large camera on the very edge of the pool, and there, just a couple meters away, was a rowboat. The idiots had brought it with them. Probably thought they were being smart by avoiding the water below. At least they tied it off so it was easy for me to pull back in. I gave it a cursory inspection, shivering at the mere thought of floating across that nightmare water in something so flimsy, and was ready to leave it until the morning when I heard a quiet splashing. Something had climbed out the water, and my heart dropped as I instinctively flicked the torchlight towards the sound of dripping water and saw a thin shivering shape climb onto the lowest steps of the castle. It looked gray and sickly, and then it started whimpering, and I realized I was looking at a girl, college-aged, with stringy hair and an outfit that might have been colorful before she'd gone in the water, but now it was just the color of ash and moss. At a glance, she almost didn't look human anymore. She looked more like a starving animal, shell-shocked and shaking. I shouted out to her, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. She dragged herself up onto a dry platform and curled up in a ball in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest and wide eyes locked into a 1,000-yard stare. And something was in that water. It came close to the surface, displacing small branches and causing the thick pond scum to bulge but never break. From the looks of things, it was circling the castle, and in some parts where the algae wasn't so thick, I got the faintest glimpse of colorless scales the size of my hand and a thick muscular trunk. Sometimes it seemed to bump up against the castle, like it knew the girl was nearby, but it didn't know how to get to her. The whole thing shook and she'd whimper extra loud, but she still didn't show any signs of becoming lucid. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about leaving her until morning. She was unresponsive and looked like she was just gonna stay in the same place. Wouldn't it be better to just go get her when the sun was up, I thought, but that was a pretty screwed up thing to think. She wasn't safe there. I wasn't safe just standing in sight of the water, and she was on some old piece of plastic held together with rusting bolts. What if it collapsed? What if something came out of the water? God knows it could happen. Something had touched my tent all those years ago. Who's to say it wouldn't walk on out to take her? At some point I made the decision. Don't know exactly what did it, but I think it was the sound she was making, that, and the knowledge she'd been in there. there. God knows what she'd seen. I had to have sympathy. She needed help and I was the only one around who could give it. So once something deep inside me clicked, I knew I had to move quickly before the fear started to screw with my head. I grabbed the rope and began to pull the boat towards me. I wasn't sure what would happen. Half expected something to breach the water like a hungry shark and swallow the boat whole, but instead whatever was circling the castle just slunk into the depths and stayed out of sight. Somehow that was even worse, and I found myself scanning the water obsessively as I worked up the courage to get into the boat. I tried to keep the momentum though. I didn't let myself start thinking or doubting myself. I just climbed in awkwardly, 1 foot at a time, near crapping myself when the whole thing wobbled and I briefly felt like I was gonna lose my balance, but I managed it, and soon I was sitting down and using the oars to pull myself through the water. As I rowed, my brain moved along in different directions. Part of me was almost watching myself, like from above, and asking over and over, what are you doing? While another watched that water for the slightest sign of life, and a third part of my brain was watching me for signs I was gonna crumble from the adrenaline and ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. Each time the oars broke the water, I kept waiting to see something coming after me, and I was about halfway there when I realized that if it was big enough, it could just bowl the whole boat over like a shark knocking a surfer off his board. It was too far to turn back when I saw the water rise in the distance. Again, it didn't break the surface, but it came close and sent a couple waves rolling across the entire pool where they lapped against the distant edge. They made the whole boat rock side to side like it was just a bit of driftwood. When the bulge in the water appeared again, it was on the other side of the boat, and I made the terrible decision to stop rowing and look over the edge. There was no bottom to the pool, but whatever was down there wasn't swallowing continents anytime soon at least. Hard to pin size down, but based on the steely blue fins that slid by close beneath me, that didn't really matter. It could eat me easy enough, and that was all that mattered. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was a fish or a squid or something else entirely, but I was pretty sure it still had a mouth somewhere in that murk. It gave the boat a gentle knock. Nothing serious. Not enough to roll it, but enough to let me know it was interested in me. I decided I couldn't just stay there floating in one place forever. I had to move. I grabbed the oars and threw all caution to the wind. The sooner I got off that water, the better. Sure, I'd have to figure out how to get back, but that was a problem for later. Right there and then, all that mattered was the rising terror and disgust that took all my strength to keep from bubbling up into full-blown panic. As soon as the boat began to move, the creature slid out of view again. Didn't know if I ought to be relieved or even more afraid, but I took advantage of the lull in its activity to close the distance, and once close enough, I pulled the boat over to the same steps the girl had climbed. Once there, I secured it with a bit of the rope and hopped onto the first step, cringing at the way the ice-cold water felt slick and slimy against my ankles. The girl flinched at my touch, but she didn't scream or pull away. I told her it'd be okay or something like that, tried my best to sound reassuring, tried to let her know I was gonna get her somewhere safe. I managed to pull her to her feet when she finally turned and looked right past me. I barely existed to her at that moment. She only had eyes for the water behind me. Something about the look on her face gave me pause though. She wasn't scanning for danger. She was looking right at something, and before I had a chance to look for myself, she started screaming. When I saw it, I wanted to scream too. I'd never seen anything like it, or since. A head like seaweed, a face like a scallop. It watched us with an almost casual interest that frightened me more than any predatory scowl. The look of a child about to pull a spider's legs off. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. It was so still, so alien, I couldn't help but pause and wonder if I was looking at something real or if it was just bad special effects. And yet the moment stretched on and on until something in that unknowable mind made a decision and the creature disappeared back beneath the water. I made a decision too, and I dragged the young woman to the nearby boat where she started to fight me the moment she saw it. Can't say I blame her. Last time she was on it, she nearly died, but there was no third option. It was stay and die or take our chances getting to safety. Unfortunately, we had barely gotten within a meter of the thing when the whole boat was blown sky high with tremendous force. For a few seconds I stood there dumbstruck, the girl crying and water falling from the sky like a momentary rainstorm. When the boat finally returned to Earth, it was a couple hundred meters away and hit dry land with a great crash. My stomach sank. How the hell were we gonna get off the castle now? Not a moment later and the entire structure began to shake. By now the girl was close to hysterics and I wasn't far behind. I took her hand and began to look for some high ground as that thing began to shake and batter the flimsy plastic supports that held the platform up. We were forced to climb up towards the plastic roof of the tallest tower, which wasn't exactly all that high up, but it was the best we could do. The bars leading to it weren't easy to navigate, and at one point I slipped and fell backwards, striking my chin painfully and looking up to see the girl girl going ahead without me. For a moment I nearly gave up, but then there was the sound of something snapping and the entire castle began to slide on one side. I looked down and saw black water rising up to meet me. The thought of sinking into that filth ignited something inside me, and I scrambled up the last few rungs and perched on top of the smooth plastic cover of the castle's highest turret. It was barely large enough for us both to sit on, but it was all we had. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I make it sound like a great tower, but it was barely 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I was up there looking down, water quickly bubbling towards us, I realized just how badly we were screwed. We delayed our inevitable death by mere seconds at most. By the time the bright red piece of plastic we clung to hit the water, the castle had broken apart so all its little pieces went floating in different directions. Ours was the last to go in, and it went down beneath our collective weight until the water reached our waists. And then it came back up, buoyant and hollow. It was no boat, but it came close. Paddle, I cried at the girl and she did, and we pulled ourselves through the water to the nearest edge. Pretty soon the makeshift raft bumped up against the tiled wall and we were dragging ourselves up onto dry land where she rolled onto her back. I continued to crawl for another few meters until I felt like I was far away enough from the water. Only once I felt safe, I let myself collapse and lay crying and laughing for what felt like hours. But the girl only cried. At first a whimper, then a sob, and then a howl. A painful gut-wrenching scream that made my own joy wilt until I could do nothing except listen to the raw grief in her voice. When I sat up to see if she was okay, she was sitting upright and staring at the thing that was rising out of the water. Again, no malice. Not really, at least I don't think so. It'd be like looking for a recognizable expression on an oyster. But it did watch us calmly as it ate what I can only assume was one of her friends. A man, I think. Hard to remember details. He didn't cry, but he did look at us for help that we couldn't give. I'm not sure I could even tell you how it ate him, but it looked painful and slow, reminiscent of a starfish, I think. At some point the girl passed out, and not long after so did I. I doubt she ever made a full recovery. The only thing she managed to say, even hours later after the paramedics had sedated her and I'd finished giving my less than truthful statement to police, were the words "the stars" over and over. I think a lot about how changed I was when I first looked down into that water and saw the abyss below, but that poor girl was actually in it. She'd swam in those waters, submerged. I don't even know how she came back from an ocean that doesn't have a surface, but she did, and somehow I don't think she'll ever be the same. But it's got me thinking about myself, about what I've lost to it. Jesus Christ, I'll be 40 before I know it, and what then? Just gonna wait here forever and ever. There's a number on the back of my paychecks, and I want to try calling it to find out more. Like, what would they do if I tried going somewhere else? Would they let me? Because it's gone. The days of Ellen Ditsworth are gone. The days of a good back and strong legs are gone. The person I was before I saw that drifter die is gone. Yesterday's gone. The past is a shared hallucination. Only the present is real. I need to get out of here before I lose more of myself. I'm never gonna understand this place. I realize that now. I can only accept that it exists and try to move on, which I should have done the day I saw those stars, because there is an abyss, and it doesn't flow through time like we do, doesn't occupy space like we do, but it's there, and it's full of gods the way a koi pond is full of fish, and I'm worried the more I think about it, the worse the park gets, and the closer I get to falling into waters that have no up or down, and which never ever end. In my dreams I am choking in the acidic bile of a creature that swallowed me whole. I'm worried that if I stay here much longer, I'll forget how to wake up. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18th, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. "Up and at 'em, cowpoke," he called in that mocking tone. "Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a..." Billy, Warden Taft silenced him with a word. If you can't act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out. Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. Nah, he muttered, this a show I can't miss. Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked him to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry, the warden, his closest men, the thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections, the prison physician, the families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. "Good morning, sirs," he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it, I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You're supposed to be... "I don't know what you mean, sir." He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. "You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me?" Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? Jesus Christ. Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. "It's Billy." I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. "I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh, at 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time." There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. "And well, it didn't work." I blinked. "It didn't what?" There came a long sigh. "Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself." And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18th, 1999. Unofficially, they tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the COs who'd once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear. But how could I not now, sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandon me. I winced. Number no Glass. I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay, Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. The thing standing behind you, I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let's take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh, you here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not, it's freedom, the only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way, if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass, but you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time, leaning in so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear, my heart stopped beating and my blood froze in place in my veins. And it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I couldn't think. I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air and my vision blurred and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later, they showed me the tapes from the security camera. There'd been nothing behind me, nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder, nothing at all. On May 7th, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, via hanging or so I heard, in some government black site somewhere far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate, really because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez? I shook my head and he sighed. Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of 5th Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them and childhood memories and all that. Everybody deserves justice, no matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force, got the case reopened, found the guy, and I watched him fry, and I like to imagine she was there watching too as he burned. There was a tense moment, and then a chuckle. Of course, after that bullet to the hip in '71, I couldn't walk the beat anymore, but I've been just as happy here. Watching justice be served, it makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order to the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally going to retire, Mendez, he confessed. After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice? I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? He'll die, sir, I promised. It'll work this time, it has to. But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward, his eyes. He stared at my expression as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes. Haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed, and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized, and with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue, and even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while I screamed myself hoarse, "Help, somebody please, Jesus Christ, we need help in here." But nobody came, and all of a sudden some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle, eyes wide, round and bloated tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my coworkers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black, or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass. No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay? Silence. I take a deep breath. How old are you, Glass? I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. I am old, child. His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and all were equally ancient, older than you could possibly know, older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it. I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. Why did you do what you did to those girls? Just so I could feel something again, he whispered. Anything. Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt, remorse? You ask that of me, who has watched empires rise and fall. He almost sounded amused. Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by essentially identical stock and in greater numbers, and then they will die and be replaced, and so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I, myself, covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing. And suddenly he stood from his chair as if he'd never been restrained at all. A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez. I stared up at him in disbelief. What? How did you? But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. You owe me a death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt. I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe. It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead I could just feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago, and every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood, and it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements, and then the both of us just sit there staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking, for an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky, that my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records, and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been unpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all, but they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why, maybe it's for research. I'm sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as Glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3rd, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song, when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23rd, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavulon and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not gonna let me walk away from this, not while I still owe him a debt, but I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from that blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know, practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients, and I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I'm slipping into madness, or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror, to finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing. I have to pay what I owe, even if it kills me. Justin and I had been together for 10 years, married for 6. I'd been with him for my whole adult life. We'd been dating since I was 17 and he was 18. I always thought he was my soulmate, the man I wanted to grow old with. Turns out I was wrong. I was devastated when I found out. Yes, Justin had been staying out later than usual, and his explanations were usually flimsy at best. I'm not stupid. I had my suspicions, but I think I just really didn't want to come to terms with the fact that my husband was seeing another woman. Honestly, I might have gone years without discovering the truth, but Justin got sloppy. Welcome home, honey. Fun night out with the guys after work again? Justin grumbled, brushing past me. I made dinner if you're hungry, beef tips and rice. I know it's one of your favorites. 8 at the bar. I'm gonna bed, he muttered, steadying himself against the wall, before woozily clomping up the stairs. My heart sank. Nights like those were becoming more and more frequent. I loved my husband. All I wanted was to spend a little quality time with him after a long day at work, but he couldn't even spare me a few minutes. I glanced up at him as he lumbered up the steps, a tear trickling down my cheek. In an instant, any sadness that I felt was replaced with burning rage, because when Justin passed underneath the overhead light, I saw what appeared to be a hickey on the side of his neck. A cocktail of emotions swirled within me. Despair, resentment, betrayal, they all hit me like a ton of bricks. I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I mean, who would? The man I had been head over heels for all that time had stabbed me in the back. I was in disbelief. I stumbled to the kitchen, pulling out a chair before I could collapse. I stared into space, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I sat there for a long time, deep in thought. After a while, I felt numb, like my entire personality had been flushed down the drain, leaving nothing nothing but an empty husk. Then a thought flashed across my mind. I'd been mistaken. That had to be it, just a mere trick of the light. It was a pretty dimly lit hallway after all. Whatever the case, I had to know. I tiptoed upstairs, abandoning my dinner. I crept up to our room as quiet as a church mouse before lightly pushing open the bedroom door. Justin was fast asleep. I didn't waste any time. I rushed across the room, careful to avoid any squeaky floorboards, and I inspected Justin's neck. His snores grew louder as I approached. He always was a heavy sleeper. I cursed when I got a closer look. Justin was sleeping on his side, and I was not going to try to roll him over. I glanced around, searching for anything that might provide concrete evidence. My eyes fell to the bedside table. Bingo. I snatched Justin's phone from his charger. I held my breath as I pressed his meaty thumb onto the screen to unlock it. I grinned, feeling a rush of exhilaration as I achieved my goal. What, huh? I froze. Justin groggily opened his eyes a sliver as my hand hovered over him. My blood turned to ice, and I prayed with all my might that my husband would just go back to sleep. To my immense shock, my prayers were answered. Justin mumbled incoherently under his breath before grabbing a fistful of covers and nodding off. I'd escaped by the skin of my teeth. I had to be more careful. The first thing I did was check Justin's texts. I immediately saw a woman's name I didn't recognize. My heart shattered when I read the messages. Hey baby, last night was incredible. See you again after work today. You're right, I wish you never had to leave. What about that wife of yours though? Won't she get suspicious? Her, not a chance. Even if she does find out, she won't leave. I could murder a baby in front of her and she'd still think I was a saint. A deep-seated rage bubbled within me. Did Justin really think that little of me? He clearly saw me as nothing more than a spineless, codependent pushover. Well, I'd show him. I screenshotted the evidence, scrolling through dozens of nude photos that I hadn't taken, and sent everything to my number. I deleted any proof of my snooping, then replaced Justin's phone on the charger. I stormed out of the room, grabbing my keys as I went. I made it halfway across the living room when the realization hit me. I had nowhere to go. All my family lived 7 hours away, it was too late to book a decent hotel, and I really didn't want to drag any of my friends into my drama. Not yet, at least. That left me with one option. I had to sleep on the couch. I plopped down onto the sofa and sighed. I didn't want to have to confront it, but I knew what I had to do. In the morning, I was going to find a lawyer and start the divorce process. The thought alone was enough to break me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I cried like a baby, silently sobbing into a scratchy pillow for what must have been hours. My eyes were puffy by the time I was done. I couldn't fathom falling asleep in a state like that, but I must have at some point, because the next thing I remember, sunlight was flooding through the blinds. Morning, babe. How'd you... The rest of the sentence caught in my throat. That was right. Justin and I were about to be over. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, tears stinging at the corners of my vision. I opened up the text I'd sent myself as proof that the past 12 hours hadn't been some twisted nightmare. But the messages were gone. My eyes grew wide as I stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. They'd been there, clear as day the night before. Something wasn't adding up. I suddenly paused, bolting upright. Was that breakfast? The tantalizing aroma of eggs and bacon wafted around the corner from the kitchen. My brows furrowed. Justin never cooked. My breathing was shallow as I tentatively shuffled toward the kitchen. Curiosity gnawed at me like a piranha. I apprehensively peeked around the corner, unsure of what I would find. To my shock, there was my husband, humming a little tune while flipping pancakes. I rubbed my eyes. Was I seeing things? Surely I was delusional from lack of sleep. That had to have been it. Then Justin turned, his icy blue eyes locking onto mine. Morning, princess. I hope you're hungry. I saw you sleeping on the couch, and I thought you might not be feeling well, so I decided to make you a hot meal to help you get better. My heart skipped a beat. Was this really my husband? It looked like him, sounded like him too. Still, I was weary. Yeah, just feeling a little under the weather is all. Are you feeling okay? You're acting different. Never been better. Honestly, I think I've really turned a new leaf, he said, placing a steaming plate before me. The old Justin is kaput. From now on, I swear, I'm going to be the best husband I can be. Our gazes connected, and I searched his expression for answers. He seemed genuine. If this was an act, it was a good one. Thanks, babe. That really makes me happy to hear. Justin beamed at me, the warmth of his smile seeping into my heart. It had been years since he looked at me like that. Well, get used to it, because I'm keeping my word. I love you, Lydia. I wanted to be suspicious. I wanted to remain silent. I wanted to keep my guard up. But how could I? All I needed was love and attention, and I was finally getting it. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my husband actually cared. "I love you too, Justin," I muttered before digging into my meal. A big part of me was still leery of my husband. His timing was pretty convenient after all, but even with all my doubts, Justin was seemingly sticking to his promise. He took me out on dates, paid to get my nails done, bought me flowers. He even started shouldering most of the housework. Needless to say, I was impressed. If he would have kept that up, I might have never suspected a thing. But one night he slipped up. We were cuddled up on the couch, watching The Truman Show, when I asked. Now, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. "Hey babe." "Yes, my love," Justin asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. "If someone close to you was an imposter, like a perfect replica except for a few tiny changes, do you think you'd notice?" Justin tensed up, his eyes wide as he slowly turned to face me. A blank stare had overtaken his expression. A chill rippled through my body when he looked at me like that. He was beginning to frighten me. "I suppose so. Why do you ask?" His voice was monotone, dripping with a tinge of urgency. I didn't know how to process his sudden shift in personality. "It's the premise of the movie we're watching." I watched as the color seeped back into his face, and he loosened up, breathing a sigh of relief. I cocked a curious brow. Why was he acting so strange? That makes sense. We sat there in uncomfortable silence, shifting our attention back to the TV screen. After a few more tense moments, I couldn't take it anymore. "I've got to use the restroom and charge my phone. I'll be right back. No need to pause the movie for me." Justin nodded before grinning up at me. His smile, had his teeth always been that straight? "Okay, baby girl, hurry back. Wouldn't want your spot to get cold." "Yeah, sure thing." I practically bolted up the stairs, locking myself in our room. I slumped against the door, trying to steady my palpitating heart. What was going on? Was it just me, or was that some seriously freaky behavior? Either way, I needed a second to calm down. I had my eyes shut, focusing on my breathing, when I heard it. My phone was buzzing from inside my pocket. I hurriedly retrieved it, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. I normally don't answer calls from strangers, but something compelled me. Maybe it was intuition, or perhaps I just wanted someone to talk to other than my husband. In the end, I accepted the call. Hello? Lydia Atkins speaking. "Look, this is gonna sound crazy, but I need you to hear what I have to say." Okay." I suddenly jolted up from my spot on the floor and stared at the locked door separating me from the hallway. Loud knocks rattled it in its frame. Lydia, who are you speaking to?" Panic surged through me as I scrambled for an answer. It's my mom. Go back downstairs, I'll be there in a minute." "That was him, wasn't it?" the caller said. "That was my husband, yes. Why do you ask?" I whispered, putting as much distance between myself and the door as possible. "Lydia, I need you to hear me out. Can you promise me that you will?" The pounding on the opposite side of the room grew even louder. "Lydia, don't listen to her. She's a liar." My stomach began to twist itself into knots. How did he know? "I'm listening. I'll hear what you have to say." The woman on the other end of the line breathed an audible sigh of relief. "Okay, my name is Adeline, and Justin and I have been seeing each other for about 9 months. That man in your house is not your husband." My blood turned to ice and I began to tremble. "Number? That couldn't be true." In a shaky voice, I asked the question that will haunt me until I die. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" There was a long pause, the bangs outside my door reaching a nauseating crescendo. When Adeline answered, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was in serious danger. "Lydia, for the past week, Justin has been living with me." "Adeline, if that's not my husband, then who is it?" I tried to be calm, to think rationally, but Adeline must have picked up on the fear in my tone. "Look, I don't know, but try to get out of the house if you can. I'm going to send you my address, and I'll explain everything in person. I have to go, I'm sorry." The line went dead, all the while the hammering continued to escalate. "Lydia, unlock this stupid door. I swear if I have to break this thing down, I will." Those words sent a chill down my spine. Justin had only raised his voice at me a handful of times in the decade that I'd known him, and none of them were as threatening as that. I stood there, momentarily stunned, but a hard kick from the other side of the door was all I needed to spur me to move. I snatched my keys from the bedside table and raced to the window overlooking the front lawn. I hurriedly unlocked it and began to pull. "Come on, you piece of crap. Open," I muttered, a massive surge of adrenaline aiding my efforts. With one final heave, the window gave way, and not a moment too soon. The door began to splinter and crack. A few more hearty blows and it was done for. I didn't have any time to waste. I punched out the screen, watching it tumble onto the shingles below. I took a deep breath before hoisting myself onto the roof. I had one leg out the window when it happened. Whoever or whatever was pretending to be my husband finally managed to get inside. My eyes grew grew wide as he charged toward me. "Lydia, don't do this, I can explain." I didn't want to hear what he had to say. Maybe that was stupid of me. Maybe I should have stayed and talked things out, but in that moment, Adeline's words kept surfacing to the forefront of my mind. Now, I can only pray that I made the right choice. I pulled myself the remainder of the way out and slid down the roof, desperate to escape my pursuer. I yelped as I felt fingernails graze my arm. My heart jackhammered in my chest as I fell onto the grass. I scrambled to my feet, somehow unscathed aside from a few minor scratches, and bolted to my car. I flung open the door, threw myself inside, and jammed the keys into the ignition. Before I peeled out of the driveway, I briefly glanced up. Justin's lookalike was standing in the window, glowering at me. A devastating sense of dread consumed me as our eyes locked. That's what terrified me the most. His eyes. They were burning with rage, but something about them felt wrong. In fact, his entire face looked off, like he was trying to express an intense emotion, but he didn't quite know how. That instantly destroyed any qualms I had about leaving. I slammed the car into reverse and floored it. I briefly looked back as I sped away, and my stomach twisted itself into knots when I did. The window was empty. I was a wreck the whole way to Adeline's. An overwhelming flood of confusion, resentment, and fear swirled within me as the realization sank in. Justin really had cheated on me, and on top of that, he was leaving me for his mistress. It was all too much to process. I flew down the empty streets, tears trickling down my face. How did this happen? Why me? Why couldn't I have normal marital problems like leaving the milk out or arguing over whose turn it was to do the dishes? I didn't ask for any of this. It wasn't fair. Fortunately, I didn't have much time to think about it. Thanks to my erratic driving, I made it to Adeline's place, if you could even call it that, in 10 minutes flat. I quickly parked beside the curb and stepped out. I gazed in bewilderment at the rundown shack as I made my way to the door. The house was tiny compared to ours. Faded yellow paint peeled off the exterior, the shutters clung on for dear life, and empty beer bottles littered the front lawn. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give me a little glint of satisfaction. I took a deep breath as I approached the door. Was I really going through with this? How did I know that Adeline was even telling the truth? Maybe I shouldn't have come. Before I had a chance to mull over any of those thoughts, the door swung open. A young woman at least 5 years younger than me stood in the doorway. As much as it pains me to admit it, she was beautiful. Long blonde hair flowed down to her waist, and ocean blue eyes stared into mine. She was a stark contrast to me in every way. "Lydia, come in," I smack. I slapped Adeline hard across the face, leaving an angry red imprint on her cheek. "Sorry, knee-jerk reaction." She nodded, staring down at her feet. "No, I deserve that. Come in, we've got a lot to talk about." I obliged, following her lead. The inside of the home wasn't much better than the outside. Empty takeout containers were strewn about the floor. The carpet was stained with God knows what, and the whole place smelled like cigarette smoke. It took everything in me not to throw up. Adeline rushed to the couch, brushing away some stale potato chips from one of the cushions. "Sorry about the mess. You can have a seat if you want." One glance at that food-crusted sofa, and I instantly knew my answer. Thanks, but I think I'll stand." "If you say so," Adeline shrugged, claiming the spot for herself. "I guess I've got some explaining to do, huh?" "You sure do." Adeline again shifted her gaze to the floor before meeting my stare. "Look, I'm really sorry about Justin. I'm not gonna sit here and try to make up some terrible excuse. I'm a terrible person." I folded my arms across my chest. "You're not wrong. Is he here right now? You're at fault too, but Justin's the one I'm really pissed at." "No, he's at the bar. He said he had some drinking to do." "Lydia, I really am sorry. I know I can't make it up to you, but..." I held up my hand to stop her. "As much as I'd love to berate you and listen to you suck up to me the whole night, that's not why I came. I've got bigger problems to worry about. How did you know about whatever took Justin's place?" Adeline bit her lip, twirling a few strands of hair between her fingers. "So tonight I went with Justin to get some of his things from y'all's house. He said you usually took a bath around that time, so he was just going to get in and get out before you noticed. But that thing, whatever it is, it met him at the door before he could go inside. I saw them arguing, then Justin walked back to the truck, pale as a ghost. He dropped me back off here without a single word. After I saw that, I knew I had to warn you. I made Justin give me your number, and I called you right when I got home." I nodded, soaking in her revelation. "That makes sense. I was wondering how you got my info, but I still have so many questions. What is this thing, and how did it manage to replace my husband? I mean, it's even got the same truck shock as he does. How is that possible? Adeline pursed her lips. I don't know. I wish I had more answers for you. But Lydia, you have to listen to me. Whatever we're dealing with, I don't think it has good intentions. Watch this. It'll prove that I'm telling the truth, she said, pulling up a video on her phone. I leaned in to get a better look. The video was of Justin. He was standing on our front porch talking to himself. I could tell right away that the one facing the camera was the fake. It was too perfect. All its features were too smooth. I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it before. The longer I watched, the more uneasy I felt. As the conversation progressed, I could tell that the real Justin was getting heated. There was no audio, but I could see him getting visibly more angry, even with his back turned. Until it happened. The imposter's face began to twist and contort in unnatural ways. It was as if someone was molding clay with an invisible hand. And that's where the video ended. The sight of it disturbed me on a primal level. My stomach churned and my head began to spin. I seriously thought I was going to be sick. That's why I had to tell you, I couldn't just sit by and let that monster hurt ye. A loud pounding against the front door cut Adeline off. Lydia, are you in there? I just want to talk. Adeline and I shared a terrified glance. This couldn't be happening. How had he tracked me down? Follow me, I'll take you out the back. You parked on the street, right? Adeline whispered, leaping from the couch. Yeah, but how do I get around him? Won't he catch me if I make a break for it? Adeline met my gaze, a fiery determination gleaming in her eyes. I'll distract him, it's the least I can do. Good luck, she said, ushering me outside. The door clicked shut before I had a chance to thank her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and without giving myself time to freak out, I raced to my car. I squeezed my keys with a vice grip as I ran, the world around me devolving into a blur of colors. I didn't even spare a glance at the front porch as I flew past. I was too focused on making it off that property alive. I was mere inches from the safety of my car. I was so close. But then I heard it. Lydia, why are you running? Come on, don't be like this. I fumbled with the keys and scrambled to hop into my car. Justin 2.0 sprinted toward me at an inhuman speed. Behind him, the door to the house was hanging wide open, and Adeline was nowhere to be found. I hurriedly turned my attention back to the steering wheel. I slammed on the gas, my tires squealing as I sped away. I glanced in the rearview mirror and my heart nearly stopped. The false Justin was standing beneath a street lamp. I don't know if it was my nerves or maybe the poor lighting, but I could have sworn that when I looked back, he was smiling, and for a moment I was sure that I saw blood dribbling down his chin. I hyperventilated, tears flooding down my cheeks as I sped away. Once I was satisfied with the amount of distance I put between myself and Justin's doppelganger, I rolled into a gas station and parked at one of the pumps. I felt so lost, so confused. What the hell had just happened? Why did this thing want to track me down so badly? And Adeline, what had he done to her? I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to that question. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my palpitating heart. It's going to be okay, just calm down and come up with a game plan. It'll all be over soon, I muttered, staring reassuringly at myself in the rearview mirror. I didn't truly believe that, but I had to do something. I couldn't afford to keep crying my eyes out and waiting there like a sitting duck. I needed a plan, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I hopped out of my car and prepaid for gas. My head was on a swivel as I inserted the nozzle of the tank. The gas station was desolate, save for an older gentleman smoking a cigarette by the front door. My foot tapped against the concrete as the fuel gauge slowly ticked up. My heart pounded like a jackhammer the entire time, just waiting to see that familiar red truck pulling in beside me. But it never did. I breathed a sigh of relief, placing the fuel pump back into its compartment. I glanced back at the man by the door for a split second before jumping back into the driver's seat. He was talking on the phone now, and was he grinning at me? I didn't want to wait to figure out what he was planning. I zipped down the road and onto the interstate. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I needed to get far away from my husband's look-alike. Once I was on the open road and all the fear had begun to dissipate, it hit me. Everything. The cheating, the lies, the betrayal, all of it. It all crashed down on me like a tidal wave. What hurt the most was the false sense of security I was lulled into. I had let myself believe that Justin had changed, that he turned a new leaf with no provocation whatsoever. The thought that all that time, none of the love I'd been given was even real. It shattered my heart all over again. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried. I sobbed uncontrollably as I continued down sparsely populated roads. I didn't want to be on the run from some unknown entity. I wanted to go back home and take a nice warm bath, but I knew I couldn't do that. I had been driving for a little over 3.5 hours before I started to get low on fuel again. I pulled off on the nearest exit. By that point, the adrenaline had worn off and I was starting to get tired. I soon found myself at a rundown Motel 6 in the middle of nowhere, Egypt. The red and blue sign flickered as I pulled into the parking lot, a great indicator of the quality of the room I'd be staying in. I took a deep breath and looked at myself in the mirror. "Come on, Lydia, you can do this," I murmured, stepping out of the car. My eyes darted from left to right as I made my way to check in. My BMW looked so out of place beside all the rusted clunkers sprinkled throughout the lot. I picked up my pace, my heart rate spiking. A bell chimed as I opened the door to retrieve my key. A young man with black, greasy hair sat behind the counter, reading a Playboy magazine. He didn't even look up as I approached. Hi, can I get a room?" The boy lazily glanced up at me before releasing a sigh. "Sure, $50. I pursed my lips as I fished around in my wallet. $50 a night for this dump, what a ripoff. I slapped the cash onto the counter, thanking my lucky stars that I wouldn't have to risk getting my bank information stolen from their card reader. The boy, whose name tag read Steven, handed me the key for room number 12 before pocketing the cash. "Thanks," I said, shooting him a glare as I snatched the keys. He gave me a slight nod before returning to his magazine. I nearly sprinted to room 12. I hurriedly jammed the key into the lock before shoving the door open. Right as I was closing it, something caught my eye. Headlights. I kept the door cracked just enough to see. Silly, right? Surely I was just being paranoid. There was no way that it was him. Justin's truck cruised into the parking lot. It was unmistakable. The faded red paint, the dent on the driver's side door, the crack running down the entirety of the windshield. It was all there. I quietly locked myself in the room, my head spinning. How was this happening? I was so far from home. How had he found me again? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. How stupid could I possibly be? The answer was so simple. I pulled out my phone and there it was. Justin and I were sharing our locations. With everything that had happened, I hadn't even thought to turn it off. I knew it was too late, but I turned off location services anyway. I felt nauseous as I placed my phone back in my pocket. How accurate was that thing? Did the doppelganger know what room I was in? Morbid curiosity got the best of me. I had to know. With a shaky hand, I brushed back the blinds to my window. The second I did, tears began to trickle down my cheeks, and my blood turned to ice. He was outside. Justin's impersonator was standing directly outside my window. His eyes were wide and manic. The grin he wore looked off, like it was too big for his face. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. The fake Justin walked up to the glass and paused for just a moment. The silence was so deafening that the only audible noise was the blood pumping in my ears. And then he moved. His tongue lolled out of his mouth and he slapped it against the glass with a wet thump. He dragged it upward, those inhuman eyes never breaking contact with mine. "I found you. It's time to stop running and let me in." His smile vanished as he gritted out those words. That was enough to snap me from my stupor. I let the blinds fall over the window and stumbled backward, nearly crashing into a table. That's where I am now, writing this at that table. I'm done for. It's only a matter of time before he breaks in. I phoned the front desk, but no one answered. I called the police too, but response times are slow this far out in the boonies. This will most likely be my final update. If the cops don't show up on time, I don't know what he'll do to me. My hands are trembling as I type this. He's trying to kick the door down, and I don't think it's gonna hold. To anyone reading this, please listen to me. If you notice a sudden change in a loved one's personality, don't brush it off, because it just might be this thing wearing their face. At first, I thought it was fun. We lived in an RV. It was like an endless vacation. One week we were in LA, the next we were in Salt Lake City. We didn't know much about our lives before this. We knew we were born in Portland and that we could never stop moving. We always knew we were a special family. I just guess we didn't know how special we were. My parents tried so hard to have kids and almost lost hope. That's why my twin sister and I were so special to them. They're little miracles. It was annoying, but at least we knew we meant something to them. Amelia and I were fairly close as far as siblings go. We were kind of each other's only friends since we were homeschooled. We felt pretty isolated. We never set up camp anywhere fun. No KOA campgrounds with ice cream shops and swimming pools. Always driving off-road and living deep in the woods. I guess it was peaceful in a way, but anyone who grew up near the woods understand it's not something you mess with. The first time I really personally realized something was up was just before our 7th birthday, when we were staying in a place in BC called Kamloops. us. We weren't supposed to sneak out or leave mom and dad's sight, but at the time, we were mischievous 6-year-olds with a huge unexplored forest in front of us. What do you expect? We waited until they fell asleep for the night and snuck out of the RV through the window, which was easy because the window was just a sheet of plastic held together by a zipper, and we set off with nothing but a crappy lantern to illuminate the path in front of us. It wasn't long before we saw something strange, a glow, not from our lantern, it was coming from in front of us. It didn't take long for us to see who or what was in front of us. It was a lady holding a small homemade torch, but she didn't look much like a lady. Her hair was matted and fallen out in some places, her skin was almost blue and looked rotted, her teeth were yellow and a few were missing, and I thought you could even see part of her jaw. She was wearing a dirty hospital gown. I didn't know where the nearest hospital was, but it had to be pretty far, because the last time I remember driving anywhere with a paved road had to be 3 hours before we set up our camp here. Amelia and I were frozen in fear, and for the first time since we had mutually decided affection towards siblings was lame, I reached for her hand. That thing reached out its bony arm to us. It moaned something almost indecipherable, like muh-buh-buh. That was enough to snap me out of it, and I sprinted away, dragging Amelia behind me. By some miracle, we had made it back to the RV, and by some other miracle, got back in without waking our parents. We didn't get much sleep, and were far too shaken up to even say good morning to our parents, let alone tell them what happened. Would they have even believed us if we told them? Well, after what happened next, I guess they would have to. When we opened the door to the RV, we saw that the remains of what we had left out overnight, a campfire reduced to ashes, the sticks covered in charcoal Amelia and I had used to draw on the rocks, and a makeshift table with a few cans of beans had been utterly destroyed. It wasn't too out of the ordinary to have our camp ravished by animals. We lived in the woods after all, but this was something no animal could do. This looked set up like whatever did it had a plan. What we saw written on the back of the RV confirmed this belief. In the charcoal sticks, someone had written, "You can't run forever," on our trailer. Mom made us breakfast while Dad cleaned up the mess. We left shortly after that and drove for hours, not even stopping for quick washroom breaks. Mom and Dad spoke in hushed whispers as Dad drove. I wish I knew what they had been talking about. That night, I guess because Mom and Dad could see we were shaken up, they took us for a rare treat, a dinner at a real restaurant. A crappy diner, but a restaurant nonetheless. It was empty there, which was why my parents liked it, as they hated crowds. I was over the moon. A root beer float and a greasy cheeseburger was anything a 6-year-old boy could dream of, which was why I was so upset when Mom and Dad made us leave the second someone else came in. It was just an old trucker, I didn't get the big deal. While we were in the RV, Amelia asked why we had to leave while I sulked in my bunk, a glorified shelf. Mom sighed. "I suppose you two are almost 7, that's old enough to know. Well, Zachary, Amelia, the reason we had to leave is because we're scared of losing you. Do you remember what happened when you were 4? I had no idea, my memory was never good, but Amelia claimed to remember. We were in Beaverton, not too far from Portland. She said that when we were 4, we were running around in a field, when a big man in camouflage and bit boots came up to us and bent down to our level. We're not supposed to talk to strangers, Amelia said. She was always a goody two-shoes. I'm John, now we're not strangers. What are your names? I'm Zach, and that's my sister Amelia. We're 4 and our birthday is July 26, 2002. I had apparently said, but I bet Amelia just said I said that to make me look worse. That's when he stopped smiling. He roughly took our hands and started to lead us away. Let's go somewhere fun, Zach and Amelia. I need to take you someplace else. My mom got teary. That's right, if your dad and I hadn't caught you just before you left, we probably would have never seen you again. I took you to someplace safe, and your dad, well, your dad. I shot that guy, in the leg, hope he had fun crawling back to his house, he said coldly. Amelia and I shot each other glances. Okay, Daddy, I'm going to go to sleep now, she said, climbing over me to get to her bunk. That night we stopped somewhere for the night. I forgot where, probably near the interior of BC or maybe Alberta. I looked out the little plastic window and I saw her. I saw that lady again. She was staring at me and Amelia in our bunk beds, reaching out for us with that same long, bony hand. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but couldn't, knowing she was there. Life continued on like that for a while. Anywhere we'd stop, she'd be there. Washington, there she was. Nevada, you bet yourself. Montana, better believe it. Amelia and I didn't really really explore much anymore, partially because we were getting older and gradually showing less interest in that sort of thing, but partially because that experience in Kamloops traumatized us both. That didn't stop the lady from trying to get us. Sometimes we'd catch a glimpse of her on the highway as we drove by. Sometimes she'd appear right where the fire of our campsite stopped illuminating, so we could barely see her. On the rare occasion we went into public to get supplies or food, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of her in the crowd. Whenever she was around, I always heard that cry of hers. After a while, she stopped scaring me. Well, as much. Everything finally made sense. The day before Amelia and I turned 14, Mom and Dad had left the RV and gave us two a rare couple hours of freedom as they gathered things for our birthday. We weren't parked ridiculously far from civilization, but I'd say a good hour's worth of walking. We weren't that scared. We had lived in the woods long enough to know as long as you didn't bother the forest, it wouldn't bother you, and the lady in the hospital gown was honestly more of an annoyance than anything else. I'd even go so far to say we had almost forgotten about her. I was reading and Amelia was rummaging around the RV for food. I was getting immersed in my book when Amelia shouted out, "Zach, come check this out." I rolled my eyes. What could it be? We had lived in this tiny RV for almost 14 years. I knew it like the back of my hand. There was absolutely no nook or cranny I didn't know about. Oh, I guess I was wrong. There, under the driver's seat cushion Amelia had pulled out, for some reason, was a box. It was small and a bit squished from all the years of my dad's butt sitting on it, but we could still tell what it was. Amelia excitedly reached to open it. Inside were papers. "Forget about it, Amelia. It's probably just boring documents for work," I said, but the look of confusion to horror on my sister's face was enough to change my mind. They were documents, but not for work. Birth documents, for us. But the stated parents weren't ours. I was apparently Zachary Jr., but nobody in my family was named Zachary. I looked at the father's name, Zachary. The mother was someone named Emily. Maybe we were adopted, I suggested. Amelia reached in and pulled out another sheet of paper. She shook her head and held out the next one for me with a shaky hand. "Infants missing from Portland Hospital. July 27th, 2002. Twins, Zachary Christopher Clark Jotter and Amelia Emily Clark. Ongoing search. Anyone with information is to report it to the police immediately." Clark, Christopher, those weren't our names. Our last name was Brown, and our parents certainly weren't Zachary and Emily. They were Ginny and Kevin. I had a feeling things were going to get worse. I was right, as Amelia pulled out the third and second to last paper. Portland mother of two murdered in hospital. Emily Clark, 27, had recently given birth to twins, now missing, when she was smothered to death in her own hospital bed. Police drawing of suspects. We looked at the police drawing. It was obviously not a complete match, but they were basically the only other two faces we had seen our entire lives. Mom and Dad. CCTV footage shows the two suspects leaving the hospital through a back door with the two infants. Search is ongoing. If spotted, do not approach these individuals. Alert the authorities immediately. We were silent as Amelia shakily grabbed the last piece of paper. This was from 2006. We were 4. After an Oregon man allegedly spotted the missing kids and was attacked by the perpetrators, a glimpse of hope is seen in this 4-year-long cold case. Father and husband of the victims, Zachary Clark, shares this message. "To my babies, I have no idea where you two are, but I will never let go of hope that one day I will see your beautiful faces again. You may not even know who I am, but that doesn't change anything. Until we meet again, Daddy loves you." We couldn't even say anything. What do you even say to that? We just stood in silence for a while. Then we heard a banging on the RV. We jumped and looked outside. It was the lady in the hospital gown, closer than ever. We could see her bluish gray skin. We could see her hazel eyes. They kind of looked like Amelia's. She moaned, reaching out for us again. I looked down to the newspaper clipping. It had a picture of the victim on it. I held it up to the window where she was staring at us. My baby, all this time. She had just wanted her babies. Amelia stepped out of the RV. I was scared at first, but this day couldn't get any crazier, so I followed. Mama, she asked, tears in her eyes. Bye, she said, reaching her bony hand out once again, but she didn't run. She let her touch her face as she gently rubbed her hand across her cheek. She did the same to me, but then pointed in the direction of the nearest town. Go, she said. Go? Why? Amelia asked. Dad, our mother croaked. Dad, Zachary Sr. Was he still alive after all this time? We have 2 hours until Mom and Dad. Amelia cut herself off. They get back. Let's go. Quick. Although we really didn't have any idea how to get to the town, we somehow somehow knew, like someone was guiding us. We busted into the sheriff's office, probably looking awful. First came the questioning, then the DNA testing, then they looked for our parents, then they arrested my parents, then the news stories and the interviews. Then we were flown out in a plane, my first plane ever, to Portland, to meet our dad. We were quite the story. They called my parents the wretches of the woods. They thought of them as evil witches, who stole us and hid us deep in the woods. I guess they were right in a way. It was weird seeing them behind bars, serving life sentences, because after all, they raised us for nearly 14 years. But that's where they'll stay. No running, no hiding. There's nowhere to hide in a cell. He burst into tears when he saw us. We didn't. It was weird. He was my dad and all, but was he? I mean, I guess I met him when I was like a few hours old, but I just couldn't connect to him. It took a while, but we slowly got used to our new lives. In a house with a bed and our own rooms, not running from everything or living in the woods. It was peaceful, although most of the time I ended up sneaking into Amelia's room because after all this time I still couldn't be alone. One time I got a knock on our window. We both woke up and saw the lady in the hospital gown outside, but she looked happier, less rotten, like she was complete again. Mama, I asked, could she stay, and I could live with the family I craved. Like she read my mind, she shook her head. I have to go, my babies, she said, reaching her hand out to us through the window as she slowly disappeared into the night. We never saw her again after that, but we always knew she was watching us. But this time, we wouldn't run.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.